Caleb Mercer hadn't laid eyes on a woman, truly seen one, in 15 years. Not since the fever took his wife and left him a ghost among the living. The Utah mountains became his prison, silence his only companion. Then one September afternoon in 1884, a stranger collapsed at his door, copper hair wild with dust, clutching a letter that bore his name. "I'm your bride," she whispered. But Caleb never wrote for a bride. Someone had. And that lie would either save him or destroy them both. Follow this story to the end and comment your city below so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The morning Caleb Mercer's life changed forever began like every other morning for the past 15 years, with silence so thick it had weight. He woke before dawn in the narrow bed he'd slept in alone since 1869, when Sarah died. The quilt still smelled faintly of the lavender she used to hang in muslin bags from the rafters. Caleb never washed it. Couldn't bring himself to erase that last ghost of her, even as the scent faded year by year until it was more memory than reality. He swung his legs out of bed, bare feet hitting cold floorboards. September in the Utah mountains meant frost on the windows and breath misting in the air inside the cabin. He dressed in the dark, same shirt, same trousers, same boots with the worn-down heel he kept meaning to fix. Routine was armor. Routine kept the thoughts at bay. Coffee first. Always coffee. Caleb built up the fire in the iron stove, hands moving through the motions without thought. Kindling, then split logs, then the old tin pot filled with water from the bucket by the door. While it heated, he stood at the window and watched the sun creep over the eastern peaks, turning the sky from black to purple to that particular shade of gold that Sarah used to say looked like heaven's front door opening. He didn't think of her often anymore. Couldn't afford to. Grief was a luxury for men who had the energy to feel things. The coffee boiled. He poured it black and bitter into a chipped mug and drank it standing up, looking at nothing. Outside, his dozen cattle were already stirring, their low calls drifting up from the pasture. The chickens would need feeding. The fence on the north property line still wanted mending from where a bear had pushed through last month. The roof over the barn leaked when it rained. Always something, always work. That was fine. Work filled the hours. Caleb finished his coffee, set the mug in the dry sink, and reached for his hat. The same sweat-stained Stetson he'd worn since before Sarah. Before this mountain, before he'd become whatever hollow thing he was now. He was halfway to the door when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Caleb froze, hand on the latch, listening. There it was again, a rhythmic creaking like wagon wheels on the rutted trail that led up from the main road. But nobody came up here. Not anymore. Jonas Miller from town used to visit once a month, bringing supplies and news Caleb didn't want. But even Jonas had given up after Caleb threatened to shoot his horse if he didn't turn around. That was 2 years ago. The creaking grew louder, accompanied now by the labored breathing of a horse pushed too hard. Caleb grabbed his rifle from beside the door, a Henry repeater that Sarah had hated, said it made the cabin feel like a fortress instead of a home, and stepped outside. The morning air bit at his face. Frost glittered on the grass like shattered glass. The sun was fully up now, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, and there, coming up the trail in a cloud of dust, was a wagon. Not a freight wagon, a passenger coach, the kind that ran between towns carrying people with money and places to be. What the hell was it doing on his mountain? The horses were lathered, their sides heaving. The driver, an older man with a face like weathered leather, pulled them to a stop in Caleb's yard and climbed down with the stiffness of someone who'd been driving all night. "This the Mercer place?" the driver called. Caleb kept the rifle visible but pointed at the ground. "Depends who's asking." "Got a delivery for Caleb Mercer. You him?" "I don't order deliveries." The driver shrugged and moved to the back of the coach. "Well, someone did. Paid in full, too. Chicago to here. Specific instructions." He opened the door and extended a hand inside. "Come on, miss. We're here." Caleb's chest tightened. "Miss?" A hand appeared first, slender, pale, trembling slightly as it gripped the driver's. Then a woman emerged from the coach, and Caleb forgot how to breathe. She was young, mid-20s maybe. Copper-red hair pulled back in a bun that had mostly come loose during the journey, wisps of it clinging to her cheeks and neck. She wore a gray traveling dress that had once been fine, but was now covered in dust and wrinkled from days of wear. Her face was pale, her lips pressed together in a thin line, and her eyes, green, he noticed, even from this distance, held a mixture of exhaustion and determination that Caleb recognized because he saw it in his own mirror. This was a woman at the end of her rope. She steadied herself against the coach, then turned and reached back inside, pulling out a small carpet bag and a worn leather satchel. The driver helped her down, and she stood there in Caleb's yard, swaying slightly, looking at the cabin and then at him. Their eyes met. For a moment, nobody moved. The horses stamped and snorted. A crow called from the pine trees. The world tilted on its axis. Then the woman took a step forward, and another, and her legs gave out. Caleb moved without thinking. He dropped the rifle and lunged forward, catching her just before she hit the ground. She was lighter than he expected, all bones and exhaustion, and she smelled like coal smoke and something sweet. Lavender, maybe, or rosewater. His hands hadn't touched a woman in 15 years, and the shock of it, the warmth of her, the reality, almost made him drop her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I'm sorry, I just—" "Don't apologize," Caleb said, the words coming out rougher than he intended. "Can you stand?" She nodded, but when he tried to help her up, her knees buckled again. He caught her once more, and this time he didn't let go. "Inside, Tom," he said to the driver. "Bring her things." The driver hesitated. "You sure? I mean, this is... well, it's irregular." "Bring her things." Something in Caleb's voice made the man move. He grabbed the carpet bag and satchel and followed as Caleb carried the woman toward the cabin. She didn't protest. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he could feel her heartbeat, rapid, fluttering, like a bird's. Inside, he laid her on the old sofa near the stove. The same sofa where Sarah used to sit and read while he worked on harnesses and tools. The woman's eyes were closed now, her breathing shallow. Dust streaked her face, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and hard travel. The driver set the bags down by the door. "She's been on the road for near a week," he said. "Chicago to Denver, Denver to Salt Lake, then up here. Wouldn't tell me why, just kept saying she had to get to the Mercer Ranch." Caleb turned to him. "What's her name?" "Didn't say. Had a letter, though." The driver reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope, yellowed and creased from handling. "Said to give this to Caleb Mercer when we arrived." Caleb took the envelope. His name was written across the front in careful script, not his handwriting, but someone's who knew how to write proper. The seal had been broken. "She read it?" he asked. "Said it was addressed to her too. Wouldn't show me, but she kept reading it over and over during the journey, like she was memorizing it." Caleb's jaw tightened. "How much do I owe you?" "Already paid. Like I said, someone in Chicago took care of everything." "Then get off my property." The driver opened his mouth to argue, then thought better of it. He touched his hat brim and headed for the door. At the threshold, he paused. "Good luck, mister. I think you're going to need it." Then he was gone, the sound of the wagon fading down the trail. Caleb stood there holding the letter, looking at the woman on his sofa. She was starting to stir, her eyelids fluttering. He should wake her, demand answers, find out what kind of game this was. Instead, he opened the letter. The paper was good quality, expensive. The handwriting was the same as on the envelope, careful, deliberate, masculine. Caleb's eyes scanned the words, and with each line his blood ran colder. "Dear Miss Whitfield, I am writing in response to your inquiry regarding matrimonial arrangements. After careful consideration, I believe we may be well suited to one another. I am a rancher of modest means living in the Utah Territory. I am 40 years of age, in good health, and of sound moral character. I seek a wife who is industrious, of good temperament, and willing to embrace the challenges of frontier life. If these terms are agreeable to you, I invite you to travel to my ranch, where we may become acquainted and, if suitable, enter into marriage. I have arranged for your passage and will meet you upon arrival. I am a man of few words, but I give you my word that you will be treated with respect and provided for to the best of my ability. Yours in sincerity, Caleb Mercer." The letter slipped from Caleb's fingers and drifted to the floor. He didn't write this, didn't send for a bride, didn't even know there were agencies that arranged such things, though he'd heard stories. Men on the frontier too isolated or too awkward to court proper, sending for women from back east like ordering equipment from a catalog. But he never... Is it really you? Caleb spun around. The woman was sitting up now, her green eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him take a step back. She looked fragile as glass but hard as iron underneath, and there was something in her expression, hope, maybe, or desperation, that twisted in his chest like a knife. Is it really you? She repeated. Caleb Mercer? Yes, I'm Caleb Mercer, but I'm Clara. She stood, wavering slightly, but refusing to sit back down. Clara Whitfield, from Chicago. She gestured at the letter on the floor. You wrote to me. You said if I came here, we might... She couldn't finish. Her voice broke, and she pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting for control. Caleb felt the world narrowing to this moment, this woman, this impossibility. Miss Whitfield, I think there's been a mistake. I didn't write that letter. I didn't send for a bride. I don't know who did this, but it wasn't... No. The word came out flat, absolute. No, Clara said again. You're lying. You have to be lying. I came all this way. I gave up everything. She swayed again, and Caleb moved to steady her, but she jerked away from his touch. Don't lie to me, please. I can't go back. I won't. There was something in her voice beyond desperation, something that sounded like terror. Caleb held up his hands, palms out. I'm not lying. I swear to you, I didn't write that letter, but you're exhausted. You need rest, food. Then we'll figure this out. Figure what out? That you don't want me? That this was all some cruel joke? It's not a joke. Someone did this. Someone wrote that letter and signed my name, but it wasn't me. He picked up the letter, studying it again. Did you write to someone first? Place an advertisement? Claire's face flushed. Yes. In a Chicago paper. I had to leave the city. I thought if I could find a husband, a good man who needed a wife, I could start over. Your letter, the letter, was the only one that sounded kind. Kind. The word hung in the air between them. Caleb looked at this woman, this stranger who'd traveled 1,000 miles based on words he never wrote, and felt something shift inside him. Anger at whoever had done this, confusion about why. But underneath, something else. Something that felt dangerously close to the way he used to feel when Sarah looked at him across the breakfast table, the morning light in her hair. No. He couldn't think like that. Wouldn't. When did you last eat? He asked. Clara blinked, thrown by the question. Yesterday morning. Maybe. I can't remember. Sit down. Mr. Mercer. Sit. Down. He pointed at the sofa, and after a moment's hesitation, she obeyed. I'm going to make you something to eat. Then you're going to sleep. Tomorrow we'll figure out who did this and how to get you back to Chicago. But right now, you need food and rest, or you're going to collapse again. I can't go back to Chicago, Clara said quietly. There's nothing for me there. Worse than nothing. Caleb wanted to ask what that meant, but the look in her eyes stopped him. Whatever she'd left behind, it wasn't just a job or a boarding house. It was something that still had claws in her. One problem at a time, he said. He went to the stove and began pulling out supplies. Bread he'd baked 3 days ago, some dried beef, a jar of preserves Jonas had brought on his last visit. As he worked, he was acutely aware of Clara watching him, her eyes following his every movement. This cabin, she said after a while. It's smaller than I imagined. It's big enough for one. The letter said you were a rancher of modest means. I didn't expect... it's very... Spare, Caleb finished. That's one word for it. Lonely, Clara said. That's the word I was looking for. Their eyes met across the room, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. The kind that comes when two people who've been alone too long suddenly see their own isolation reflected in someone else. Caleb looked away first. Eat this. He handed her a plate with bread, beef, and a spoonful of preserves. It's not much, but it'll hold you. Clara took the plate with trembling hands. She ate like someone who'd forgotten how. Small bites at first, then faster as hunger overtook caution. Caleb watched her from the corner of his eye, pretending to busy himself with the stove. When she finished, she set the plate aside and looked at him. Thank you. It's just food. It's more than that. You could have turned me away, sent me back down the mountain with that driver. But you didn't. You collapsed in my yard. What kind of man would I be if I sent you away like that? The kind I'm used to, Clara said, so quietly he almost didn't hear. Caleb wanted to ask her about that too, but she was already standing, swaying on her feet. You need to sleep, he said. You can have the bed. I'll take the sofa. I can't take your bed. You can, and you will. This isn't a discussion. Clara opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. The fight went out of her all at once, leaving her looking small and lost in the middle of his cabin. Just for tonight, she said. Tomorrow I'll figure something out. Tomorrow, Caleb agreed, though neither of them believed it would be that simple. He showed her to the bedroom, the same room he'd shared with Sarah, though he didn't say that. Clara looked at the narrow bed, the washstand, the single window with its view of the mountains, and something in her expression softened. It's peaceful here, she said. It's isolated. Sometimes those are the same thing. She turned to him. Mr. Mercer, Caleb, I know this isn't what you wanted. I know I'm an intrusion, but please just give me a few days. Let me rest. Let me think. Then I'll go, I promise. Caleb should have said no. Should have told her that a few days wouldn't change anything. That whoever wrote that letter had made a mistake that couldn't be fixed by waiting. Instead, he said, 3 days. Then we figure out what's next. Relief flooded her face. Thank you. She closed the door, and Caleb stood there in the hallway, listening to the soft sounds of her moving around. The rustle of fabric, the creak of the bed, the whisper of breath. Sounds he hadn't heard in this house for 15 years. He returned to the main room and picked up the letter again, reading it by the fading afternoon light. I am a man of few words, but I give you my word that you will be treated with respect and provided for to the best of my ability. Someone knew him well enough to write this, knew his age, his occupation, his isolation, knew that if a woman showed up claiming to be his bride, he wouldn't turn her away without at least hearing her out. Jonas. The name hit him like a physical blow. Jonas Miller, his oldest friend, the only person who still visited before Caleb drove him off. Jonas, who'd been after him for years to move on, to find someone new, to stop living like a ghost. Jonas, who'd said more than once, You're dying up here, Caleb. Just slowly. If I could find a way to make you live again, I'd do it. Damn the consequences. Damn you, Caleb whispered to the empty room. He crumpled the letter in his fist, then smoothed it out again. Because no matter how angry he was, no matter how much he wanted to ride into town and put his fist through Jonas's face, the fact remained. Clara Whitfield was here. Exhausted, frightened, with nowhere else to go and something dark chasing her from Chicago. And for the first time in 15 years, Caleb's cabin didn't feel like a tomb. He sat on the sofa as the sun set, watching shadows crawl across the floor, and thought about the woman sleeping in his bed. Clara. Red hair and green eyes, and a voice that broke when she said she couldn't go back. 3 days. He'd given her 3 days. Somehow, Caleb suspected it wouldn't be enough. Night fell heavy on the mountain. Caleb sat by the dying fire, unable to sleep, the rifle across his knees more from habit than need. In the bedroom, Clara's breathing had finally evened out into the deep rhythm of true rest. He should be planning, figuring out how to confront Jonas, working out how to send Clara back to Chicago safely, or at least to some town where she could start fresh without false promises chaining her. Instead, he found himself listening to her breathe. It was strange, having another person in the house. Strange and unsettling, and something else he didn't want to name. The cabin felt different, smaller, maybe, but also more alive, like a held breath finally released. Caleb stood and walked to the window. Outside, the moon was rising over the eastern peaks, painting the world in silver and shadow. His land stretched out before him, the pasture where his cattle slept, the barn with its sagging roof, the fence line that needed mending. Evidence of a life half-lived, maintained but not tended, survived but not embraced. You're dying up here, Caleb. Maybe Jonas was right. Maybe Caleb had been dying by inches for 15 years, so gradually he hadn't noticed the life bleeding out of him. But that didn't give Jonas the right to do this, to forge a letter, to send for a woman without asking, to drag someone else into Caleb's self-imposed exile. A sound from the bedroom made him turn, soft crying, muffled, like Clara was trying not to wake him. Caleb's hand went to the door handle, then stopped. This wasn't his pain to interrupt. Whatever Clara was crying for, the life she'd left, the lies she'd discovered, the uncertain future ahead, she had a right to it. But the sound cut through him anyway, made his chest tight and his hands clench. He'd heard Sarah cry like that once, near the end when she knew the fever would take her. She'd tried to hide it, turning her face to the wall, but Caleb had known. He'd climbed into bed beside her and held her until the crying stopped, until she fell asleep in his arms for the last time. The memory was sharp enough to draw blood. Caleb turned away from the door and returned to the sofa. He lay down, still fully dressed, the rifle on the floor beside him. The crying in the bedroom eventually stopped, replaced again by the quiet breathing of sleep. Tomorrow, he told himself. Tomorrow he'd ride into town and get answers. Tomorrow he'd figure out how to undo this mess. But as sleep finally pulled him under, his last thought wasn't of Jonas or the forged letter or the anger burning in his gut. It was of green eyes and copper hair and a voice saying, "Sometimes peaceful and isolated are the same thing." Caleb woke to the smell of coffee. For a moment, still half asleep, he thought he was dreaming, or that he'd somehow slipped 15 years into the past, back to mornings when Sarah would wake before him and have breakfast started. The cabin filled with the scent of coffee and frying bacon and fresh bread. Then memory crashed back. The woman. The letter. The impossible situation. He sat up fast, instantly alert. The fire in the stove was going, and through the bedroom door, left open now, he could see the bed was empty, neatly made with the quilt pulled tight and tucked in at the corners. Caleb stood and moved to the main room. Clara was at the stove, still wearing her traveling dress, but with the sleeves rolled up and her hair pulled back in a simple braid. She was cooking eggs, his eggs, from his chickens, and there was a pot of coffee on the back burner. She turned when she heard him and offered a small, uncertain smile. "I hope you don't mind. I woke up and couldn't go back to sleep, and I thought, well, you fed me last night. It seemed only fair to return the favor." Caleb stared at her. In the morning light, he could see her more clearly, the exhaustion still in her face, the worry in her eyes, but also something else, a kind of determination. The set of her jaw said this was a woman who'd made a decision and meant to see it through. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know, but I wanted to." She turned back to the eggs. "I hope you like them scrambled. I'm not much good at anything else." "Scrambled is fine." They stood there in awkward silence while Clara finished cooking. She found plates. How had she known where he kept them? And divided the eggs, adding a slice of the bread he'd given her last night. She poured coffee into 2 cups and brought everything to the small table near the window. "Sit," she said, and there was something in her voice, not quite authority, but close. That made Caleb obey. They ate without talking. The eggs were good, better than anything Caleb had cooked in years. He'd forgotten that food could taste like something other than fuel. Finally, Clara set down her fork and looked at him. "I've been thinking." "About?" "About what you said last night, that someone else wrote that letter." She paused. "I believe you." Caleb's eyebrows rose. "Just like that?" "I'm a good judge of character, Mr. Mercer. Had to be, where I come from. And you're a terrible liar. Last night, when you said you didn't write it, you were telling the truth. I could see it." "So where does that leave us?" Clara took a breath. "I have a proposal. Not that kind of proposal," she added quickly, color rising in her cheeks. "A business arrangement." "I'm listening." "You gave me 3 days. Let's make it a month." Caleb nearly choked on his coffee. "A month?" "Hear me out. You live up here alone. This place, no offense, it needs work. The fence is falling apart. The roof on the barn leaks. The chicken coop is held together with prayer and rust. I saw all that when I arrived." She leaned forward. "Let me stay for a month. Let me help. I can cook, clean, mend clothes, tend animals. I'm stronger than I look, and I'm not afraid of hard work. Miss Whitfield, in exchange, you give me room and board, nothing else. Separate sleeping arrangements, no expectations. Just a month to rest and figure out my next step. And you get help around the ranch. Help you clearly need. Caleb shook his head. People would talk. People where? You said yourself this place is isolated. Who's going to see? Who's going to care? Jonas Miller will care when I ride down there and break his jaw. Clara blinked. Jonas Miller? You know who wrote the letter? I have a suspicion, and when I see him, I'll get the truth. Then take me with you. What? When you go to town, take me with you. Let me hear him admit it. Then, if you still want me gone, I'll go. But give me the month first, please. There was that word again. Please. Said like it cost her something to ask. Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the fear underneath the determination. This woman was running from something, and whatever it was, it terrified her more than being stranded on a mountain with a stranger. What are you so afraid of? He asked quietly. Clara's face went still. That's my business. Not if you're asking to stay under my roof. I'm asking for a month of work in exchange for shelter, that's all. My reasons are my own. They stared at each other across the table. Caleb wanted to push, to demand answers, but something in Clara's expression stopped him. There were walls there, high and thick, built from pain he recognized because he'd built the same ones. A month, he said finally. But we go to town tomorrow. I get answers from Jonas. And if there's any trouble, any hint that your being here causes problems, you leave. Agreed? Clara exhaled, relief flooding her features. Agreed. And separate sleeping arrangements. You keep the bedroom. I'll sleep out here. Mr. Mercer, Caleb, if you're staying, you might as well use my first name. A small smile touched her lips. Caleb, and you should call me Clara. Clara. The name felt strange in his mouth, foreign. He hadn't called a woman by her first name since Sarah. Finish your breakfast. We've got work to do. They fell into a rhythm over the next day, tentative at first, like dancers learning a new pattern. Clara took over the inside of the cabin, cleaning, organizing, going through supplies and making lists of what they needed. Caleb worked outside, mending the fence on the north property line and trying not to think about the woman in his house. But he did think about her, constantly. He thought about the way she moved through the cabin with quiet efficiency, like she was trying to make herself useful enough to justify her presence. He thought about her hands, surprisingly strong for how delicate they looked, and the way she hummed under her breath while she worked. He thought about the fear in her eyes when she'd said she couldn't go back to Chicago. Mostly, he thought about how the cabin felt different, alive. That afternoon, Clara brought him water while he worked on the fence. She picked her way across the pasture in her traveling dress, which was looking worse for wear, carrying a jar wrapped in cloth to keep it cool. You should take a break, she said, handing him the water. It's hot. Caleb drank, the water cool and sweet. Thank you. Clara looked out at the mountains, shading her eyes against the sun. It's beautiful here, harsh, but beautiful. That's one way to describe it. How would you describe it? Caleb considered. Honest. The land doesn't lie. Doesn't pretend to be something it's not. You work, you survive. You don't, you die. Is that why you stay? The honesty? I stay because there's no reason to leave. Clara turned to him, and there was something searching in her gaze. Was there ever a reason to leave? Sarah. The name rose in his throat, but he couldn't say it. Once. Long time ago. What happened? She died. The words came out flat, emotionless. 15 years of practice made them that way. Fever. Took her in 3 days. Clara's expression softened. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. Grief doesn't care about time, though, does it? Caleb looked at her sharply. There was understanding in her voice, the kind that came from experience. You lose someone too? In a way. Clara hugged herself, despite the heat. Someone I thought I knew. Someone I thought would, but it doesn't matter now. They're gone, and I'm here. That why you left Chicago? Clara's jaw tightened. Yes. Want to tell me about it? No. Fair enough. Caleb handed back the jar. Thank you for the water. Clara nodded and started back toward the cabin, but halfway there she stopped and turned. Caleb? Tomorrow, when we go to town, will you tell people who I am? What I am? What do you mean, what you are? A mail-order bride. Someone who came here expecting one thing and found another. Someone who's unwanted. The word hit Caleb harder than it should have, unwanted. Like she was something broken, something to be discarded. I'll tell them you're a friend, he said. Visiting for a while, helping out. That's all they need to know. They won't believe you. I don't care what they believe. Clara smiled then, small but genuine. Thank you. She walked back to the cabin, and Caleb watched her go, trying to ignore the way something in his chest loosened at that smile. Unwanted. The word echoed in his head as he returned to the fence. Nobody should feel unwanted, especially not someone who looked at the world like Clara did, with caution and hope warring in her eyes, like she couldn't decide which one would hurt less. Caleb worked until sunset, then returned to the cabin to find dinner waiting. Clara had made stew from the dried beef and vegetables he had stored in the root cellar, and the smell of it made his stomach growl. They ate together at the table, and this time the silence was more comfortable. After dinner, Clara washed the dishes while Caleb sat by the fire, pretending to read a week-old newspaper but mostly watching her move around his kitchen. She'd made the cabin feel like a home again, just in one day. That should have scared him, should have sent him running. Instead, it made him feel something he hadn't felt in 15 years. Relief. Clara, he said, and she turned from the dishes. Tomorrow, when we see Jonas, whatever he says, whatever reason he had for doing this, it doesn't change the agreement. A month. You've got a month. Clara dried her hands on a towel, her expression unreadable. Why? Why what? Why help me? You don't know me, don't owe me anything. I'm a stranger who showed up under false pretenses. So why? Caleb looked at her, at the fear and hope and exhaustion in her face, and knew he couldn't tell her the real reason. That having her here made the silence bearable, that her presence reminded him what it felt like to be human. Because everyone deserves a chance to start over, he said instead, even if that chance comes from a lie. Clara's eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears back. Thank you, Caleb. She turned away before he could respond, finishing the dishes with her back to him. When she was done, she bid him good night and retreated to the bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. Caleb sat by the fire long after she'd gone to bed, listening to the night sounds of the mountain, wind through the pines, the distant call of a coyote, the creak and settle of the cabin itself. Tomorrow, they'd go to town. Tomorrow he'd confront Jonas. Tomorrow he'd get answers. But tonight, for the first time in 15 years, Caleb Mercer wasn't alone. And against all reason, against every wall he'd built, that felt like enough. The morning came cold and clear, frost painting intricate patterns on the windows like lace made of ice. Caleb woke on the sofa with his back aching and his mind already racing toward the confrontation ahead. He could hear Clara moving in the bedroom, the soft sounds of someone preparing for a day they dreaded. He sat up and pulled on his boots, lacing them with deliberate slowness, buying time he didn't need. Town meant people, questions. Jonas. The thought of facing his old friend, former friend maybe, made his jaw clench hard enough to hurt. The bedroom door opened and Clara emerged wearing the same traveling dress, though she'd done her best to clean and press it. Her hair was pulled back severe and tight, like armor. She looked pale but determined, her chin lifted in a way that told Caleb she'd spent the night steeling herself for this. Ready? He asked. No, but let's go anyway. They hitched up Caleb's wagon in silence, the old mare stamping and snorting in the cold air. Clara climbed up to the bench seat without waiting for help, settling her skirts around her with practiced efficiency. Caleb took his place beside her, acutely aware of how close they were sitting, their shoulders nearly touching. The trail down the mountain was rough, rutted from spring runoff and summer storms. The wagon jolted and swayed, and more than once Clara had to grab the seat to keep from being thrown. Caleb drove with one hand, the other resting near hers in case she needed steadying. She never asked for it. They'd been riding for maybe 20 minutes when Clara finally spoke. This friend of yours, Jonas, What kind of man is he? Caleb considered the question. Good man. Or was. Known him since before I came to the mountain. He was at my wedding, sat with me the night Sarah died, kept visiting even after I made it clear I wanted to be left alone. Sounds like someone who cares about you. Caring doesn't give him the right to meddle in my life, doesn't give him the right to drag you into this. Clara was quiet for a moment, watching the landscape roll by. Pine forests giving way to scrub brush, the mountains rising behind them like sleeping giants. Maybe he thought he was saving you. From what? From yourself. The words hit harder than they should have. Caleb's hands tightened on the reins, making the mare toss her head in protest. He loosened his grip, forcing his voice to stay level. That wasn't his choice to make. No, Clara agreed. It wasn't. But lonely people do desperate things. Trust me, I know. Caleb glanced at her. She was staring straight ahead, her face expressionless. But there was something in her voice, a hollowness that spoke of hard experience. He wanted to ask what desperate things she'd done, what had driven her to answer an advertisement from a stranger, to travel across the country on the promise of a new life. But the walls around Clara were high and guarded, and Caleb knew better than to push. He had walls of his own. The town of Redemption came into view as they rounded the last bend, a collection of weathered buildings clustered along a single main street, with a church at one end and a saloon at the other. Maybe 200 people called it home, most of them ranchers or miners or the shopkeepers who served them. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and strangers were noticed immediately. Caleb felt Clara stiffen beside him as they entered town. A few people on the street stopped to stare. Old Mrs. Henderson outside the general store, the blacksmith's apprentice taking a break from the forge, a group of cowboys lounging outside the saloon. Their eyes tracked the wagon, landing on Clara with undisguised curiosity. They're staring, Clara whispered. Let them. Caleb, you're with me. That's all that matters. He pulled the wagon up outside Miller's Hardware, Jonas's store. It was a solid building, well-maintained with glass windows that gleamed in the morning sun and a painted sign that read Miller and Sons, even though Jonas had no sons, no family at all except for the town itself. Caleb set the brake and climbed down, then turned to help Clara. She hesitated, her eyes fixed on the store. I can wait here, she said. No, you come with me. You deserve to hear this. Clara took his offered hand and stepped down, and Caleb was struck again by how light she was, how fragile she seemed despite the steel in her spine. He didn't let go of her hand right away, and she didn't pull back. For a moment they stood there, two people bound together by a lie, facing the truth. Then Caleb released her and headed for the door. The bell above it jangled as they entered. The store was dim after the bright sunlight, smelling of sawdust and machine oil and the penny candy Jonas kept in a jar by the register. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from nails to lanterns to bolts of fabric. At the back counter, Jonas Miller stood with his back to them, inventorying something in a ledger. Be right with you, Jonas called without turning around. Caleb's hands clenched into fists. You'll want to turn around for this, Jonas. Jonas froze. Then, slowly, he set down his pencil and turned. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and barrel-chested, with a beard going gray and eyes that usually held warmth and humor. Right now they held recognition and something that might have been guilt. His gaze moved from Caleb to Clara and back again. Ah, hell. That's all you've got to say? Ah, hell. Jonas came around the counter, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Caleb, listen. Did you write that letter? Caleb, did you write it? Did you forge my name? Did you send for her? Caleb pointed at Clara, who stood very still beside him, her face pale. Jonas looked at Clara, and something in his expression softened. Ma'am, I'm sorry you got caught up in this, but yes, I wrote the letter I sent for you, and I'd do it again. The admission hung in the air like gun smoke. Caleb took a step forward, and Jonas didn't back down. They stood there, two old friends on the edge of violence, while Clara watched with wide eyes. Why? Caleb's voice was low, dangerous. Why would you do this? Because you're dying up there, Caleb. You've been dying for 15 years, and I'm sick of watching it. Jonas's voice rose, years of frustration pouring out. You think I don't know what that cabin is? It's a tomb, a place you go to wait for death because you're too much of a coward to live. You son of a... Sarah's been gone 15 years. 15 years, Caleb, and you're still up there, still alone, still punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. When was the last time you laughed? When was the last time you did anything besides work and sleep and wait for the next day to be exactly like the last? Caleb's hands were shaking. You had no right. I had every right. I was your friend. Am your friend, whether you like it or not. And friends don't let friends waste away to nothing. So you sent for a stranger. You dragged her across the country on a lie? You thought that would fix things? Jonas looked at Clara again, and this time there was apology in his eyes. I hoped that if someone came, someone good and decent who needed a fresh start as much as you do, maybe you'd both find something worth holding on to. Clara spoke for the first time, her voice steady despite the tremor Caleb could see in her hands. You used me, both of us. You gambled with our lives like we were pieces on a chessboard. Yes, ma'am, I did. And I'm sorry for that, but I'm not sorry for trying to give Caleb a reason to live again. That wasn't your choice to make, Clara said, echoing Caleb's earlier words. He gets to choose his own life, even if that life is lived alone. Jonas nodded slowly. You're right. It wasn't my choice, but I made it anyway, and now here we are. Caleb felt the anger draining out of him, leaving only exhaustion. He'd expected to feel vindicated, satisfied when Jonas confessed. Instead, he just felt tired and confused, and something else he couldn't name. We had an agreement, Jonas said quietly. The agency in Chicago. I paid for everything. Her passage, her expenses. She was supposed to stay for at least a month. Get to know you. See if it could work. It can't work, Caleb said. It was built on a lie. Most things are, at the start. That doesn't mean they can't become something real. Jonas looked between them. Give it a chance, both of you. What's the harm in that? The harm is that she came here expecting one thing and got another. The harm is that I didn't ask for this. Didn't want it. Didn't you? Jonas's voice was gentle now, probing. Didn't you ever want to stop being alone? Didn't you ever wake up and think maybe, just maybe, you could have something again? Caleb couldn't answer, because the truth was complicated and messy, and he didn't want to examine it too closely. Clara stepped forward, her posture rigid. Mr. Miller, I appreciate what you thought you were doing, but you can't force connection between people. You can't manufacture feelings or relationships. What you've created here it's a mess, and Caleb and I will deal with it our own way. And how's that? Jonas asked. We've made an arrangement. A month. I help him with the ranch. He gives me shelter while I figure out my next step. That's all. Nothing more. Jonas looked at Caleb. That true? It's true. Well, Jonas scratched his beard, thinking, I suppose that's something. Better than you sending her straight back to Chicago. I can't go back to Chicago, Clara said, the words bursting out before she could stop them, then quieter. There's nothing for me there. Jonas's expression sharpened with curiosity, but he didn't press. Then I'm glad you're staying, even if it's just for a month, even if it's just business. Caleb wanted to leave, wanted to get Clara back to the wagon and return to the mountain where things made sense, where there weren't old friends making choices for him and women with secrets in their eyes. But something kept him rooted. The money you spent, he said. For her passage. I'll pay you back. No need. I'll pay you back, Jonas. I don't want to owe you. Jonas sighed. Fine. Pay me back if it makes you feel better. But Caleb, maybe think about why you're so angry. Is it really about the letter? Or is it because some part of you is glad she came? Caleb turned without answering and headed for the door. Clara followed, but at the threshold she paused and looked back at Jonas. Mr. Miller? You said I was supposed to stay a month. Get to know him. See if it could work. Yes, ma'am. What made you think it could? What made you think we'd be suited? Jonas smiled, sad and knowing. Because when I wrote to that agency, I described the kind of woman Caleb would need. Someone strong. Someone who'd been through hard times and come out still standing. Someone who understood that healing isn't linear and love isn't simple. And when you answered, when I read your letter asking for a fresh start, asking for someone kind, I knew. You were both looking for the same thing. What's that? A reason to stop running. Clara's breath caught. Then she turned and followed Caleb outside, leaving Jonas alone in his store with his ledger and his guilt and his hope. The street was busier now, the town coming fully awake. More people stared as Caleb and Clara walked to the wagon. He heard whispers, saw pointing fingers. This would be all over redemption by sundown. Caleb Mercer, the hermit, coming to town with a strange woman. Let them talk. He'd stopped caring what people thought 15 years ago, but as he helped Clara into the wagon, he saw the way she held herself, the shame and discomfort radiating from her like heat. She cared. Whatever had happened in Chicago, whatever she was running from, it had taught her to fear judgment. Caleb climbed up beside her and took the reins, but before he could signal the mare forward, a voice called out, "Caleb Mercer, that you?" Caleb turned to see Reverend Thomas striding toward them, his black coat dusty from the road, his round face creased with pleasure. He was the town's preacher, a good man who'd tried more than once to coax Caleb back to church, back to community. "Reverend," Caleb said with a nod, "haven't seen you in town for months. Thought maybe you'd finally turned into a proper mountain man, living on berries and stream water." The Reverend laughed at his own joke, then his eyes landed on Clara. "And who is this lovely young lady?" Caleb felt Clara tense beside him. "This is Miss Whitfield. She's staying at my ranch for a while, helping out." The Reverend's eyebrows rose. "Helping out? Well, that's wonderful. Always said that place needed a woman's touch. Been saying it for years, haven't I?" "You have," Caleb agreed, keeping his voice neutral. "You must come to church this Sunday, both of you. The whole congregation would love to meet Miss Whitfield. Wouldn't they, dear?" This last was directed at a woman who'd appeared at the Reverend's elbow, his wife, Martha Thomas, a bird-like woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. Martha looked Clara up and down, taking in the wrinkled traveling dress, the tired eyes, the defensive posture. "I'm sure they would," she said, and there was something in her tone that made Caleb's hackles rise. "Tell me, Miss Whitfield, where are you from?" "Chicago," Clara said quietly. "Chicago? My goodness, that's quite a journey. What brings you all the way out here to our little territory?" "I needed a change. Mr. Mercer was kind enough to offer work." "Work. I see." Martha's lips pressed into a thin line. "And you're staying at his ranch? Unchaperoned?" The judgment in her voice was clear. Caleb opened his mouth to tell Martha Thomas exactly where she could put her judgment, but Clara spoke first. "I have my own quarters, Mrs. Thomas, separate from Mr. Mercer. Everything is perfectly proper, I assure you." Of course, Reverend Thomas interjected, shooting his wife a quelling look. "We didn't mean to suggest otherwise. We're just surprised, that's all. Caleb's been alone so long, it's wonderful to see him accepting help, accepting company." "It's temporary," Caleb said. "A month? Maybe less." "Well, temporary or not, you should both come to church. Sunday service starts at 10. We'd be honored to have you." Caleb wanted to refuse, wanted to avoid the gossip and speculation and knowing looks, but he felt Clara trembling slightly beside him, and something protective surged in his chest. "We'll think about it," he said. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we need to get back." He snapped the reins before the Reverend could say more, and the wagon lurched forward. Behind them, he could hear Martha Thomas's voice, not quite low enough. "Did you see that dress? And the way she looked? I tell you, there's a story there. A woman doesn't travel that far alone unless she's running from something." Clara made a small sound, almost a whimper, and Caleb's jaw clenched so hard he thought his teeth might crack. "Ignore her," he said. "She's right, though. I am running, and everyone can see it. Let them see. Let them think whatever they want. It doesn't matter." "It matters to me." Clara's voice was thick with unshed tears. I hoped that out here I could be someone new, someone without a past, but it follows me anyway. It's written all over me." Caleb wanted to tell her she was wrong, but he couldn't, because he saw it too, the weight she carried, the shadows in her eyes. Whatever had happened in Chicago, it had marked her. They rode in silence back toward the mountain. The sun climbed higher, warming the air, but Clara kept her arms wrapped around herself like she was cold. Caleb watched her from the corner of his eye, This woman who'd appeared in his life like a storm, bringing chaos and confusion and something that felt dangerously like hope. Halfway home, Clara spoke again. Jonas was wrong, you know. About what? About us both running. You're not running, Caleb. You're hiding. There's a difference. Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. You don't know anything about me. I know enough. I know you built a life around an absence. I know you use grief like a shield. I know you've convinced yourself that being alone is the same as being safe. She turned to look at him. But it's not. It's just another kind of dying. You sound like Jonas. Maybe Jonas is right. Maybe you are dying up there. Maybe I am too, in my own way. Clara looked away, back to the mountains rising ahead of them. Maybe we're both so busy protecting ourselves from more pain that we've forgotten what it feels like to be alive. The words hung between them, uncomfortable and true. Caleb wanted to argue, to defend his choices, his solitude. But what could he say? That 15 years alone had made him happy? That the silence didn't sometimes feel like it was suffocating him? That he didn't wake up some mornings and wonder what the point of it all was? What happened in Chicago? He asked instead. Clara was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, softly, I was a fool. I trusted the wrong person, believed promises that were never meant to be kept. And when it all fell apart, when I realized the truth, she stopped, swallowed hard. I couldn't stay. Not in that city, not in that life. So I looked for a way out, any way out. And I found your letter, Jonas's letter. It seemed like providence, like maybe God was giving me a second chance. And instead you got me, a man who didn't want you, didn't ask for you. Yes, instead I got you. Clara looked at him then, and there was something in her eyes that made his breath catch. But you gave me a month anyway. You gave me shelter and food and a chance to breathe. That's more than anyone else has given me in a long time. Caleb didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to process the gratitude in her voice or the way it made him feel, protective and guilty and confused all at once. They reached the ranch as the sun hit its peak. Caleb unhitched the mare and turned her into the pasture while Clara went into the cabin. By the time he came inside, she had coffee brewing and was pulling together something for lunch. You don't have to do that, he said. I want to. It helps me think. Caleb washed his hands in the basin by the door and sat at the table, watching her work. She moved with practiced efficiency, like cooking was meditation, a way to quiet her mind. He understood that. Work had always been his way of dealing with things too big to face head on. What Jonas said, Clara began, not looking at him. About the month, about getting to know each other, seeing if it could work. What about it? What if we actually did that? Caleb stiffened. Did what? Not the marriage part, not the romantic part. But what if we actually used this month to know each other, really know each other? Not as employer and worker, not as two strangers sharing space, but as people, as friends maybe. Why would we do that? Clara turned to face him, and her expression was open, vulnerable in a way he hadn't seen before. Because I think Jonas was right about one thing. We're both running from something, both hiding, and maybe, just maybe, having someone who understands that, someone who doesn't judge it, might help. Might make the running a little less lonely. Caleb wanted to say no. Wanted to keep the walls up, keep the distance safe. But he thought about the past 2 days. About Clara cooking in his kitchen, sleeping in his bed, sitting across from him at meals. About how the cabin had felt different, better. About how he'd felt different, better. Friends? He said slowly. Nothing more. Nothing more, Clara agreed. Just two people sharing space and stories, helping each other figure out what comes next. For a month. For a month. Caleb studied her face, looking for deception, for hidden motives. But all he saw was a woman as tired and damaged as he was, reaching out for connection the only way she knew how. All right, he said. Friends. Clara smiled, and it transformed her face, chasing away some of the shadows. Thank you, Caleb. They ate lunch together, and for the first time the conversation flowed naturally. Clara asked about the ranch, and Caleb found himself talking more than he had in years. about the cattle, the land, the challenges of mountain ranching. She listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was actually paying attention. When it was her turn, she told him about Chicago. Not the bad parts, not yet, but the good things. The lake, the buildings reaching toward the sky, the energy of so many people in one place. "Don't you miss it?" Caleb asked. "I miss what I thought it was, the dream of it. But the reality," she shook her head. The reality was something else entirely. After lunch, they worked together. Caleb showed Clara how to gather eggs from the chickens, and she laughed, actually laughed, when one of the hens pecked at her fingers. The sound of it hit Caleb square in the chest, unexpected and warm. Later, while he repaired a broken halter, Clara sat nearby mending one of his shirts. She'd found his sewing kit, Sarah's sewing kit really, though he'd been using it for years, and set to work without being asked. "This shirt has seen better days," she said, holding it up to examine the frayed collar. "Most things up here have." "Including you?" Caleb looked up sharply, but there was no judgment in her face, just curiosity. "Maybe," he admitted. "Well, I'm good at mending things, shirts at least. People are harder. You can't mend people." "No, but you can sit with them while they mend themselves. Sometimes that's enough." They worked in companionable silence as the afternoon wore on. The light shifted, golden and warm, painting the cabin in shades of amber. Outside, the chickens clucked and the cattle lowed and the wind whispered through the pines. It was peaceful, more than peaceful. It was right in a way Caleb couldn't articulate. That evening, after dinner, they sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the western peaks. The sky turned purple and pink and orange, colors so vivid they seemed unreal. "I've never seen anything like this in Chicago," Clara said softly. "It's one thing the mountain does well, sunsets. What else does it do well?" Caleb thought about it. "Silence, stars, teaching you what you're made of." "What are you made of, Caleb Mercer?" He looked at her, this woman who'd been a stranger 3 days ago and now felt like something else, something more. "I used to think I knew. Now I'm not so sure." Clara nodded slowly. "I understand that. I thought I knew who I was too, what I wanted, what I deserved. But it turned out I didn't know anything at all." "What do you want now?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the dying light. "Honestly, I don't know. Peace, maybe. A place where I can breathe without feeling like walls are closing in. A chance to be someone other than the person I was. You can be anyone you want up here. Mountain doesn't care about your past. But I care. I carry it with me. Every day. Every moment." She turned to him, and in the fading light her eyes looked dark, haunted. "How do you let go of something that's part of you? How do you forgive yourself for being a fool?" Caleb didn't have an answer. He'd spent 15 years trying to forgive himself for not saving Sarah, for surviving when she didn't, and he still hadn't managed it. "Maybe you don't," he said finally. "Maybe you just learn to carry it better." Clara smiled sadly. "Is that what you've done?" "I've tried. Not sure I've succeeded." "But you're still here, still standing. That counts for something." "Does it?" "Yes. It counts for everything." They sat in silence as the stars began to appear. First a few, then dozens, then hundreds, until the sky was thick with them. Clara tilted her head back, wonder on her face. "There are so many," she breathed. "City lights drown them out. Up here, you can see what's always been there. I wish I'd known about this before. About places like this. Maybe I wouldn't have stayed in Chicago so long. Maybe I would have run sooner. Running doesn't solve anything, just changes the scenery." Clara looked at him. "Then why did you run up here after your wife died?" The question hit like a physical blow. Caleb's jaw worked, emotions churning in his chest. Anger, grief, something close to shame. "That was different," he managed. "Was it? Or were you just running from pain the same way I am?" "I wasn't running. I was grieving. For 15 years, alone on a mountain? That's not grieving, Caleb. That's hiding. You said it yourself. The mountain teaches you what you're made of. What has it taught you?" Caleb stood abruptly, the rocker scraping against the porch. I should check on the cattle. It's dark. I can manage in the dark? He left the porch, left Clara sitting there with her questions and her insight that cut too close to bone. He walked out into the pasture, the grass wet with dew, the stars bright overhead, and tried to remember how to breathe. She was wrong. She had to be wrong. He wasn't hiding. He was just, what? Living? Surviving? Waiting? Waiting for what? The question followed him as he checked the fence line, as he counted the cattle by starlight, as he stood in the middle of his land and felt the emptiness of it pressing down on him. For 15 years, he'd told himself this was enough. The work, the silence, the memories of Sarah that he could take out and examine on long winter nights. He'd convinced himself that wanting more was betrayal, that moving forward meant leaving her behind. But Clara's words echoed in his head. That's not grieving. That's hiding. Maybe she was right. Maybe he'd been hiding so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to live. Caleb returned to the cabin to find Clara already in the bedroom, the door closed. He lay down on the sofa, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathe in the next room. Tomorrow they'd work. They'd talk. They'd continue this strange dance of two broken people trying to figure out how to be human again. And somewhere in the back of his mind, quiet but persistent, was the knowledge that a month wasn't very long, wasn't nearly long enough. For what, he didn't let himself think about. Not yet. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both foreign and familiar to Caleb. He woke each morning to the smell of coffee already brewing, to the sound of Clara moving through the cabin with quiet efficiency. She kept her distance when he needed it, offered conversation when the silence grew too heavy, and worked alongside him with a determination that surprised him daily. A week passed. Then another. The fence got mended. The roof on the barn stopped leaking. The cabin began to show signs of care it hadn't seen in years. Curtains washed and rehung, floors scrubbed clean, small repairs made to things Caleb had learned to live with broken. Clara worked like someone trying to prove her worth, and it bothered him more than he wanted to admit. She didn't need to prove anything, but every time he tried to tell her to slow down, to rest, she'd just smile that sad smile and say she needed to keep busy. He understood that better than she knew. They talked more as the days went by. Small things at first, the weather, the cattle, plans for the day. But gradually the conversations deepened, like miners digging for something valuable, not sure what they'd find, but unable to stop looking. One afternoon, 2 weeks into Clara's stay, Caleb found her in the barn, attempting to lift a saddle that was too heavy for her. He watched for a moment as she struggled, her face flushed with effort and frustration, before stepping in. "Let me," he said, taking the saddle from her hands. Clara stepped back, breathing hard. "I could have managed." "Maybe, but you don't have to." He hung the saddle on its proper hook. "You push yourself too hard." "I need to be useful." "You are useful, but that doesn't mean you have to break yourself doing it." Clara looked at him, and there was something raw in her expression. "If I'm not useful, what am I? Just another burden, another mistake." "You're not a mistake, Clara." "Aren't I? I came here under false pretenses. I'm staying in your home, eating your food, taking up space in your life. If I'm not at least earning my keep, stop." Caleb moved closer, close enough to see the exhaustion in her eyes, the fear underneath the determination. "You don't have to earn the right to exist. You don't have to prove you deserve kindness. You just have to be." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back fiercely. "That's not how the world works." "Maybe not, but it's how this mountain works. It's how I work." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You don't even want me here. Not really. You're just too decent to throw me out." "Is that what you think?" "It's what I know. I see the way you look at me sometimes, like you're trying to figure out how you ended up with this complication in your life, like you're counting down the days until I'm gone." Caleb felt something twist in his chest. Because she was partly right, he had counted the days at first, but somewhere along the way, he'd stopped. Somewhere along the way, the thought of Clara leaving had started to feel less like relief and more like loss. "You're wrong," he said quietly. "About what?" "About me wanting you gone. I did, at first. I won't lie about that. But now—" He trailed off, unsure how to finish. How to explain what he didn't fully understand himself. But now what? Caleb looked at her, at this woman who'd crashed into his carefully constructed solitude and somehow made it better without even trying. Now I'm getting used to having you here, to not being alone. And that scares me more than anything. Clara's breath caught. For a long moment they stood there in the dim barn, dust motes dancing in the shafts of light, the smell of hay and leather and horses surrounding them. It scares me too, she whispered. Getting used to this. To you. To feeling like maybe I could belong somewhere. Why does that scare you? Because everything I've ever belonged to has been taken away. Every time I let myself believe I've found a home, it turns out to be temporary, conditional, based on lies. Her voice cracked. I can't survive that again, Caleb. I can't let myself hope and then have it ripped away. It'll destroy me. Caleb wanted to tell her she was safe here, that nothing would be taken away. But he couldn't make that promise. In 2 weeks, her month would be up. She'd have to leave or make a choice to stay, and staying would mean something neither of them had agreed to, would mean crossing lines they'd carefully drawn. Then we won't hope, he said instead. We'll just live, day by day, no promises, no expectations, just this. Just this? Claire repeated, like she was testing the words. Then she nodded. Okay, just this. They left the barn together, walking back toward the cabin in the fading afternoon light. Caleb's shoulder brushed against Clara's, and neither of them moved away. That night, after dinner, they sat by the fire and Clara finally told him about Chicago. Not everything. He could feel the things she left out, the wounds still too raw to touch. But enough. She'd worked in a boarding house, she said. Respectable work, or it should have been. But the man who owned it, Mr. Garrett, had seen her as more than an employee. He'd made promises, marriage, security, a future, and she'd believed him. Why wouldn't she? She'd been alone since her parents died, desperate for someone to see her as more than just a pair of hands to clean rooms and cook meals. I was so stupid, Clara said, staring into the fire. He was married. Of course he was married, but he said his wife didn't understand him, that he was going to leave her. All the same tired lies men have been telling women since the beginning of time, and I fell for every single one. You weren't stupid. You were hopeful. There's a difference. Is there? Because hope got me exactly nowhere. Except ruined. She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. When his wife found out, she made sure everyone knew what I was, what I'd done. I couldn't walk down the street without whispers following me, couldn't keep my job, couldn't stay in my boarding house. I was poison, and everyone knew it. Caleb's hands clenched. Where is he now, this Garrett? Still in Chicago, still married, still running his boarding house like nothing happened. Me who pay the price. The bitterness in her voice was sharp enough to cut. Caleb wanted to tell her it wasn't fair, that she deserved better, but the words felt hollow. Of course it wasn't fair. The world rarely was, especially to women alone. That's when you saw the advertisement? He asked. Yes, I was desperate, broke, sleeping in a church basement and running out of options. I thought if I could just get away, start over somewhere no one knew me, maybe I could salvage something, build a new life. She looked at him. And then I got your letter, Jonas's letter, and it seemed perfect, too perfect. But I was desperate enough to believe in perfect. And you got me instead. Yes, I got you instead. Clara smiled, small and sad. A man who didn't want me, didn't ask for me. A man so buried in his own grief he could barely see straight. Not exactly what I was hoping for. But you stayed anyway. Because where else was I going to go? Back to Chicago, to the whispers and the shame, to another city where I'd be just as alone, just as lost? She shook her head. At least here, I have a roof over my head, food to eat. And you've been kind, kinder than I deserve. You deserve kindness, Clara. What happened to you? What that man did to you? That wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? I made the choice to believe him. I made the choice to... She stopped, color flooding her face. I made my choices. I have to live with them. Caleb saw the shame in her expression, the self-loathing, and it made him angry. Not at her, never at her, but at the world that taught women to blame themselves for men's sins, at Garrett, wherever he was, at every person who'd whispered about Clara instead of helping her. "You were taken advantage of," he said firmly, "by a man who used your loneliness against you, by a system that punishes women for the same things it excuses in men. None of that is your fault." Clara's eyes glistened. "You don't understand. You can't. You're a man. You don't know what it's like to have your entire worth measured by your virtue. To have one mistake, one moment of weakness, define you forever." "No, I don't know what that's like, but I know what it's like to be defined by loss. To have one moment, one failure, shadow everything that comes after." "What failure? Sarah's death wasn't your fault, wasn't it?" Caleb stood and walked to the window, his back to Clara. "She got sick because I brought the fever home. I was in town trading with some travelers passing through. Didn't know they were sick, didn't think to be careful. I brought it back to Sarah, and 3 days later she was gone." He heard Clara stand, felt her move closer. "That's not failure," she said softly. "That's just life. Cruel and random and unfair, but not your fault. I should have protected her. That was my job, my responsibility, and I failed. So you punished yourself, locked yourself away up here where nothing could touch you, where you couldn't fail again because you wouldn't let yourself try." Caleb turned to face her. "Is that so different from what you're doing? Running from Chicago, hiding behind work and usefulness, trying to make yourself small enough that life can't hurt you again?" Clara flinched like he'd struck her. For a moment, anger flashed in her eyes, but it faded quickly, leaving only resignation. "No, it's not different at all. We're both cowards, aren't we? Both so scared of being hurt that we've stopped living." "Maybe. But at least we're honest about it. That's something." They stood there in the firelight, two damaged people seeing themselves reflected in each other's pain. It should have been depressing, should have made the weight of their shared brokenness unbearable. Instead, it felt like relief, like finally being understood. "Clara," Caleb said, and his voice was rough. "What happened in Chicago, with Garrett, it doesn't make you less. Doesn't make you dirty or shameful or any of the things those people said. It just makes you human." A tear slipped down Clara's cheek, then another. "How can you say that? You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you're strong. I know you work yourself to exhaustion trying to prove something that doesn't need proving. I know you're brave enough to cross the country alone on nothing but hope. I know—" He stopped, the next words catching in his throat. "I know that having you here has made me feel more alive than I have in 15 years. Clara's breath hitched. "Caleb, I'm not saying this to— I don't expect anything, but you should know. You should know that you matter, that your being here matters." More tears fell, and this time Clara didn't try to stop them. She closed the distance between them in 3 quick steps and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. Caleb froze. For a heartbeat, too, he stood rigid, his body forgetting how to respond to human touch. Then slowly, his arms came up and encircled her, holding her while she cried. She felt impossibly small against him, fragile, but he could feel the strength in her too, the steel core that had brought her this far and kept her standing when everything told her to fall. "I'm sorry," Clara sobbed against his shirt. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't—" "Shh. It's all right. You're all right." "I'm not. I'm broken. Everything about me is broken." "Then we're both broken. And maybe that's okay. Maybe broken people understand each other better." Clara pulled back just enough to look up at him, her face wet with tears, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. She was a mess. She was beautiful. "What are we doing, Caleb? What is this?" He didn't have an answer, didn't know how to name what was happening between them, this connection that had grown from necessity into something deeper, something that felt both dangerous and inevitable. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I'm tired of being alone, tired of hiding. And if that makes me selfish, it doesn't. It makes you human." Clara's hand came up to rest against his chest, right over his heart. "I'm tired too. So tired of running, of being afraid, of thinking I don't deserve good things." "You deserve good things, Clara. So do you." They stood like that, wrapped in each other's arms, the fire crackling behind them and the night pressing against the windows. It wasn't a kiss, wasn't even close to one, but it felt like something shifting, some wall crumbling that had stood between them since Clara arrived. Eventually, Clara stepped back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I should go to bed. It's late." "Clara, wait." She paused, looking at him. "Thank you," Caleb said, "for trusting me with your story. I know it wasn't easy. Thank you for listening, for not judging." "I'm not in a position to judge anyone." Clara smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "Good night, Caleb." "Good night." She disappeared into the bedroom, closing the door softly. Caleb stood there for a long time, staring at nothing, his chest still warm where Clara had rested against him. Everything was getting complicated. The clear lines they'd drawn, employer and worker, strangers sharing space, temporary arrangement, were blurring, and Caleb knew he should stop it, should pull back before things went too far. But he didn't want to. For the first time in 15 years, he wanted to move forward instead of staying frozen in the past. The question was whether Clara wanted the same thing, and whether either of them was brave enough to try. The next morning brought rain, a cold autumn downpour that turned the yard to mud and made outdoor work impossible. Caleb woke to the sound of it hammering on the roof, the rhythmic drumming that Sarah used to say sounded like horses running. He found Clara already up, standing at the window and watching the rain with a distant expression. "Morning," he said. She turned, and her smile was genuine, if a bit shy. "Morning. Coffee's ready?" They ate breakfast in comfortable silence, the rain providing a backdrop to their thoughts. When they were done, Clara started to clear the dishes, but Caleb stopped her. "Leave them. We're not working today." "But there's always work." "Not today. Today we rest." Clara looked uncertain. "I don't know how to rest." "Then I'll teach you." He built up the fire while Clara dried her hands, then gestured to the sofa. "Sit." "Caleb, I really should—" "Sit. Please." She obeyed, perching on the edge of the cushion like she might need to bolt at any moment. Caleb retrieved a book from the shelf, one of the few he owned, a collection of Shakespeare's plays that Sarah had loved, and handed it to Clara. "Read," he said. "Read? Just read? Just read. Out loud if you want. Or to yourself. It doesn't matter. Just sit and read and let the world take care of itself for a few hours." Clara stared at the book like it was a foreign object. Then slowly, she opened it, paging through until she found something that caught her interest. She began to read, silent at first, her lips moving with the words. Caleb sat in the chair across from her, pretending to look at a farming almanac, but mostly watching Clara. He saw the moment she relaxed, the tension bleeding out of her shoulders as she lost herself in the story. Saw her expression change. Curiosity, then interest, then something close to joy. After an hour, she looked up. "This is nice." "What is?" "This. Just sitting, not having to do anything. I'd forgotten what it felt like." "You work too hard. So do you. Maybe we both need to learn to stop, sometimes." Clara closed the book, marking her place with a finger. "Caleb, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What was she like?" "Sarah?" The question caught him off guard. No one asked about Sarah anymore. People in town had learned not to, and Jonas knew better than to bring her up. But Clara was looking at him with such open curiosity, such lack of judgment, that he found himself wanting to answer. "She was light," he said finally. "That's the best way I can describe it. She made everything brighter just by being there." She laughed easily. "Loved hard. Saw the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. She sounds wonderful." "She was. Too good for me, really. I never understood what she saw in a rough rancher with no social graces and a tendency to speak before thinking." "Maybe she saw what I see," Clara said softly. "What's that?" "A good man. A kind man. Someone who's been hurt but hasn't let it make him cruel." Caleb's throat tightened. "I'm not as good as you think I am. And I'm not as bad as I think I am. Maybe we're both somewhere in the middle, just people, trying our best." They talked for hours after that, the rain continuing its steady beat on the roof. Clara told him about her childhood, about parents who died too young and left her alone in a city that didn't care about orphans. Caleb told her about his early years ranching, about the struggles and small triumphs, about building this life with Sarah only to see it all end too soon. The conversation flowed naturally, each story leading to another, each revelation building a bridge between them. And somewhere in the midst of it, Caleb realized he was doing something he hadn't done in 15 years. He was letting someone in. The thought should have terrified him, should have sent him running for the safety of his walls and his solitude. But with Clara sitting across from him, her green eyes warm in the firelight, her presence filling the empty spaces in his cabin and his life, terror felt distant. What he felt instead was something close to peace. By evening, the rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming. They made dinner together, working side by side in the small kitchen, their movements synchronized like they'd been doing this for years instead of weeks. After they ate, Clara insisted on teaching Caleb a card game she'd learned in Chicago. He was terrible at it, but her laughter when he made mistakes was worth every lost hand. "You're doing it wrong," she said, giggling as he played yet another card out of turn. "I'm doing exactly what you told me to do." "No, you're doing what you think I told you to do. There's a difference." "Then you're a poor teacher, or you're a poor student." Caleb found himself smiling, really smiling, for what felt like the first time in forever. Maybe both. Clara's laughter faded, but her smile remained. She looked at him across the table, cards forgotten, and something passed between them, something warm and dangerous and full of possibility. "I have 2 weeks left," Clara said quietly. "I know." "And then what?" "I don't know." "Should we figure it out? Make a plan?" Caleb wanted to say yes, wanted to talk about futures and possibilities, and what came after the month was up. But fear held him back, fear of hoping for too much, of reaching for something that might slip through his fingers. "Let's just be here," he said instead. "Right now, this moment. We'll worry about the rest later." Clara nodded slowly. "All right, just this moment." But as they returned to their card game, both of them were thinking about what came next, about choices that would have to be made, about the risk of wanting something, someone, when wanting had only ever led to loss. The days continued to pass, each one bringing them closer to the end of Clara's month and the decision that loomed ahead. They worked together, ate together, talked long into the nights about everything and nothing. The boundaries between them grew thinner, more permeable, until Caleb couldn't remember what it felt like to be alone. One afternoon, a week before Clara's time was up, they were working in the garden when Caleb's hand brushed against hers as they both reached for the same weed. They froze, the touch electric even through the dirt and calluses. Clara pulled back first. "Sorry." "Don't be." They went back to work, but Caleb was hyper-aware of her beside him, of every accidental touch, every shared glance. The air between them felt charged, heavy with things unsaid. That night, Clara seemed restless. She moved around the cabin, straightening things that didn't need straightening, her nervous energy filling the space. "What's wrong?" Caleb finally asked. "Nothing. Everything. I don't know." She stopped pacing and turned to him. "Caleb, we need to talk about what happens next week." "Clara." "No, we need to. We can't just keep pretending we have all the time in the world. In 7 days, my month is up. I need to know." She took a breath. "I need to know if you want me to leave." The question hung between them, stark and unavoidable. Caleb stood, crossing to where Clara stood by the window. "Do you want to leave?" "I asked you first." "I'm asking you now." Clara's hands twisted together. "It's not about what I want. It's about what makes sense, what's practical. I can't just stay here indefinitely without some kind of plan, some kind of purpose." "What if your purpose is just to stay, to be here?" "As what? Your housekeeper? Your charity case?" "As my—" Caleb stopped, the word he wanted to say too big, too frightening. "As someone who belongs here. With me." Clara's eyes widened. "Caleb, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want you to leave. I'm saying that somewhere over the past few weeks, you've become—" He struggled for words. "Important. You've become important to me." "Important," Clara repeated like she was testing the word. "What does that mean?" "It means the thought of you leaving makes me feel like I'm losing something vital. It means I wake up looking forward to seeing you. It means this cabin feels empty when you're not in it. Even if you're just in the next room. He moved closer. It means I care about you, Clara. More than I should. More than is safe. Clara's breath came faster. This isn't what we agreed to. This was supposed to be temporary. Business. Nothing more. I know. But when have feelings ever cared about agreements? Caleb, I can't. We can't. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. I'm not what you think I am. I'm damaged, ruined. You deserve someone whole. I'm not exactly whole myself. That's different. How? How is my brokenness different from yours? Because yours comes from loss, from loving someone and losing them. That's noble, tragic. Mine comes from stupidity, from letting myself be used. There's nothing noble in that. Caleb reached out and gently took her shoulders, making her look at him. Listen to me. What happened to you with Garrett in Chicago, it doesn't define you. It's something that happened, not something you are. And anyone who can't see that, anyone who would judge you for it, isn't worth your time. But people will judge. They already do. You saw Mrs. Thomas. You know what they'll say if I stay. Let them say it. I don't care. But I care. Clara's voice broke. I care because I've lived through those whispers before. I felt the weight of that judgment, and I won't bring that down on you. You don't deserve it. Then we'll leave. We'll go somewhere no one knows us. Start fresh. Clara stared at him. You'd leave? Leave this ranch? This place you've built your whole life around? If it meant... Caleb stopped, realizing what he was saying, what he was offering. Yes, I'd leave. No. Clara stepped back, breaking his hold. No, I won't let you do that. I won't let you give up everything for me. I'm not worth it. You are to me. Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. Stop, please stop. You're making this harder. Making what harder? Leaving. When the time comes, I have to be able to leave. And if you keep saying things like this, if you keep making me hope... She choked on a sob. I can't survive hoping and losing again. I can't. Caleb felt something crack in his chest. Then don't hope. Stay. Not because of what might be, but because of what is. Right now, this moment. You said you felt like you might belong here. So belong. Stop running. Stop hiding. Just stay. Clara looked at him with such longing, such fear that it hurt to see. For how long? Until you realize what a mistake I am? Until the past catches up? Until we decide otherwise. Together. As equals. As partners. Partners, Clara whispered. Yes, if you want. If you're willing to try. She searched his face, looking for doubt, for deception, for any sign that this was another lie, another false promise. But Caleb met her gaze steadily, letting her see the truth of what he felt. I'm afraid, Clara said finally. So am I. What if we fail? What if this doesn't work? Then we'll fail together. But at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have chosen to live instead of just survive. Clara closed her eyes, and more tears escaped. When she opened them again, there was something different in her expression, something that looked like decision. One condition, she said. What? We wait. Until the month is up, give ourselves this last week to be sure, really sure. And then, if we both still want this, if we're both still willing to try, we'll figure it out. Together. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. It was hope, tentative and fragile, but hope nonetheless. 1 week, Caleb agreed. 1 week. They stood there in the lamplight, the weight of what they'd just agreed to settling over them. The next 7 days would determine everything, whether they had the courage to reach for something real or whether fear would drive them apart. Caleb didn't know which way it would go, but for the first time in 15 years, he wanted to find out. The week that followed felt suspended in time, each day precious and fragile as spun glass. Caleb and Clara moved around each other with new awareness, every glance weighted with possibility, every accidental touch a reminder of what hung in the balance. 3 days after their conversation, Caleb woke to find frost coating the windows in delicate patterns, and Clara already dressed, standing in the main room with a determined expression he'd come to recognize. We're going to church, she announced. Caleb sat up, rubbing sleep from his eyes. What? Church. Today. We're going. Clara crossed her arms. If I'm going to stay, if we're going to try this, I need to face those people. I need to stop hiding from their judgment. You don't owe them anything. No, but I owe myself the chance to hold my head up, to prove I'm not ashamed. Her jaw set stubbornly. I'm going, with or without you. Caleb looked at her, standing there in her worn dress with fire in her eyes, and felt something fierce and protective surge in his chest. Give me 10 minutes to clean up. They rode into town in the wagon, the morning air sharp and cold enough to see their breath. Clara sat rigid beside him, her hands clasped tight in her lap. Caleb could feel the tension radiating from her, the fear she was trying so hard to mask. If it gets to be too much, he said quietly, we leave. No questions asked. Clara nodded but didn't speak. The church was a simple white building at the end of Main Street, its steeple pointing toward heaven like an accusation. People were already gathering outside, dressed in their Sunday best, talking in clusters. Conversation stopped as Caleb's wagon approached. He pulled up to the hitching post and climbed down, then turned to help Clara. Her hand trembled in his, but she stepped down with her chin lifted, meeting the stairs head on. Reverend Thomas appeared at the church door, his face lighting up when he saw them. Caleb, Miss Whitfield, what a wonderful surprise! Come in, come in. But Martha Thomas materialized beside her husband, her expression sharp as a blade. How lovely to see you both. Together. Again. The emphasis on the last word was deliberate, pointed. Clara's grip on Caleb's arm tightened, but her voice was steady. Good morning, Mrs. Thomas. You look well. As do you, my dear. Ranch life must agree with you. Martha's smile didn't reach her eyes. Though I do wonder what your family back in Chicago must think of your arrangement. I have no family in Chicago, Mrs. Thomas. No one to answer to but myself. How convenient. Caleb felt anger flare hot in his chest, but before he could speak, another voice cut in. Martha, that's enough. Jonas Miller stepped forward from the crowd, his expression stern. These are our neighbors, our friends. They deserve respect, not your venom. Martha's face flushed. I'm simply concerned about propriety. Propriety is treating people with kindness, something you might practice more often. Jonas turned to Caleb and Clara. Pay her no mind. Come, I saved you seats inside. He led them into the church, leaving Martha sputtering behind them. The interior was simple. Wooden pews, a plain altar, sunlight streaming through tall windows. Jonas guided them to a pew near the middle and sat beside them, a buffer against the whispers that followed in their wake. Thank you, Clara whispered to Jonas. Don't thank me yet. You're braver than I gave you credit for coming here. Jonas looked at Caleb. Both of you. The service began and Caleb tried to focus on Reverend Thomas's words about forgiveness and redemption, but his attention kept drifting to Clara beside him. She sat straight-backed and still, her hands folded in her lap, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her fingers. Halfway through the sermon, he reached over and covered her hand with his. Clara's breath hitched. She turned to look at him, surprise and something warmer in her eyes. Then, slowly, she turned her hand over and laced her fingers through his. They sat like that for the rest of the service, hands joined while whispers rustled through the pews like wind through leaves. Let them talk. Let them judge. Caleb found he didn't care anymore. All that mattered was the woman beside him and the courage it had taken her to be here. After the service, people gathered outside again, some approaching to greet Caleb with cautious friendliness, others keeping their distance and speaking in low voices. Clara handled it all with quiet dignity, answering questions when asked, deflecting prying ones with polite firmness. Then Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who ran the general store, approached. Unlike Martha Thomas, her expression was kind. Miss Whitfield, I wonder if you might do me a favor, she said. Clara looked uncertain. Of course, if I can. My daughter's getting married next month, and I'm hopeless with a needle. I saw that beautiful mending work on Mr. Mercer's shirt last week when he was in town. Would you consider helping with the wedding dress? I'd pay you, of course. Clara blinked, clearly not expecting this. Yes, I'd be happy to help. Wonderful! Come by the store tomorrow and we'll discuss the details. Mrs. Henderson patted Clara's hand. It's good to have another skilled seamstress in town. Lord knows we need one. As Mrs. Henderson walked away, Clara looked at Caleb with wonder in her eyes. She wants to hire me. You're good at what you do. Why wouldn't she? Because I thought no one here would want anything to do with me. Not after the way they looked at me. Some people see what they want to see. Others see what's actually there. Caleb squeezed her hand. Mrs. Henderson sees your skill, your value. That's all that matters. Jonas appeared at their side. That went better than expected. Though I suspect will be the main topic of conversation at every dinner table in Redemption tonight. Let them talk, Caleb said. Brave words. You sure about that? About all of this? Jonas looked between them, and there was something knowing in his expression. Because once you start down this road, there's no going back. The town will expect certain things, have certain assumptions. Clara stiffened, and Caleb understood what Jonas was implying. A man and woman living together unmarried would only be tolerated so long. Eventually, people would demand propriety, would demand marriage or separation. We're aware, Caleb said carefully. Are you? Because I'm the one who started this mess, and I feel responsible. I don't want either of you hurt by my meddling. Jonas ran a hand through his hair. Maybe I should tell everyone the truth about the letter, about what I did. Take the blame off you both. No, Clara said quickly. That would make things worse. People would think, they'd assume I came here under false pretenses, that I'm some kind of con artist or worse. But you did come under false pretenses. My false pretenses. But I'm choosing to stay under my own choice. That's what matters now. Jonas studied her face. You're really thinking of staying? Clara glanced at Caleb, and in her eyes he saw hope warring with fear. I'm considering it. Well then, Jonas clapped Caleb on the shoulder. I guess my meddling worked out after all, though you both still have my apology for the mess I created. Keep your apology, Caleb said. Just promise you won't interfere again. No more interference. You have my word. Jonas smiled. But I reserve the right to say, I told you so at your wedding. Clara's face flushed crimson, and Caleb felt heat creep up his own neck. We're not... There's no... Yet, Jonas finished, his grin widening. There's no wedding yet, but give it time. He walked away whistling, leaving Caleb and Clara standing in awkward silence. He's presuming quite a lot, Clara said finally. He is. Marriage. He thinks that we should... I know what he thinks. Clara turned to face him fully. Caleb, we haven't even decided if I'm staying past this week. We're not ready to think about that. Aren't we? The words came out before Caleb could stop them. If you stay, Clara, people will expect it eventually. Jonas is right about that much. They'll tolerate us living together for a while, but not indefinitely, not without marriage. So what are you saying? That marriage is the price of staying? I'm saying it's the reality of the world we live in. Caleb took a breath. But I'm also saying it wouldn't be the worst thing. Would it? Clara's eyes went wide. You can't possibly. We barely know each other. We've spent nearly every moment together for a month. We've shared our stories, our fears, our broken pieces. That's more than some couples know after years of courting. But marriage, Caleb, that's not something to enter lightly. That's forever. I know, and I'm not asking, not now. I'm just saying, if you stay, if we try this, marriage will be part of the conversation eventually, and I'm not opposed to it. To you, to us. Clara looked like she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This is insane. A month ago, I didn't know you existed. Now you're talking about marriage? A month ago, I was dying alone on a mountain. Now I'm living. You did that, Clara. You brought me back to life. Caleb moved closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in her green eyes. So yes, maybe it's insane. Maybe we're both crazy for even considering this, but I'd rather be crazy with you than sane and alone. Clara's hand came up to rest on his chest, right over his heart. You're making it very hard to be cautious. Good. We've both been cautious long enough. Maybe it's time to be brave instead. They stood there on the church lawn, the whole town probably watching, and Caleb didn't care. All he cared about was the woman in front of him and the possibility she represented, of healing, of hope, of a future he'd stopped believing in. 4 more days, Clara whispered. We still have 4 more days to decide. 4 more days, Caleb agreed. They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence. Something settled between them even as questions remained. That night, they sat by the fire, and Clara told him more about the sewing work Mrs. Henderson had offered. It could be steady income, she said, if I'm good enough. If people like my work. They will. You're talented. You've seen me mend 1 shirt. And it was the best mending I've ever seen, Caleb smiled. You could build something here, Clara. A business, a reputation, a life. Our life, Clara said softly. If I stay, it would be our life. Together. Yes. Together. The word hung in the air, full of promise and possibility. The next morning, Clara went to town to meet with Mrs. Henderson while Caleb worked on the ranch. She returned hours later, her eyes bright with excitement. She showed me the dress, Clara said, nearly bursting with the news. It's beautiful, Caleb, silk and lace and so delicate, and she trusts me to work on it. She said she'd recommend me to other people if I do well. Caleb couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. That's wonderful. And she paid me in advance. Look. Clara pulled out a small pouch of coins. It's not much, but it's mine. Money I earned with my own skill. You should keep it. Save it. Clara's excitement dimmed slightly. For what? For whatever you need, your future. Caleb, I'm not trying to push you away. I'm just saying you should have your own money, your own means. You shouldn't be dependent on me or anyone else. Clara looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. You're right. Thank you for understanding that. That evening brought unexpected visitors. Caleb and Clara were finishing dinner when they heard horses approaching. Caleb grabbed his rifle and went to the door, Clara behind him. 3 riders emerged from the twilight, rough-looking men, dusty from travel, with hard eyes that swept over the cabin and land with calculating interest. Help you, gentlemen? Caleb called, keeping the rifle visible but not threatening. The lead rider, a man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, smiled without warmth. Maybe. We're looking for someone. A woman. Red hair, green eyes, came west from Chicago. You seen anyone like that? Caleb's blood ran cold. Behind him, he felt Clara freeze. Who's asking? Caleb said. Name's Dutch. I work for a man in Chicago, a Mr. Garrett. He's looking for some property that was stolen from him. Property that might have come this way. Property, Caleb repeated, anger simmering in his gut. Valuables. Some jewelry, some money. He thinks the woman who worked for him might have taken them when she left. Real sudden-like. Her leaving. Made him suspicious. Clara's hand gripped Caleb's arm, her fingers digging in. He could feel her shaking. Well, you can tell Mr. Garrett he's wasted his time. Haven't seen any woman matching that description. And I don't appreciate strangers riding onto my land making accusations. Dutch's eyes narrowed. That's so. Funny, because word in town is you got a female visitor. Been here about a month. Red hair. My business is my own, and you're trespassing. I suggest you leave before I encourage you with buckshot. The 3 men exchanged glances. Dutch's hand moved toward his gun, and Caleb raised the rifle smoothly, aiming at the man's chest. Don't, Caleb said quietly. I'm a fair shot, and I don't miss at this distance. Dutch held up his hands in mock surrender. Easy now. We're just looking for what's ours. If this woman you don't know happens to turn up, you tell her Mr. Garrett wants his property back, and he's willing to overlook the theft if she returns it promptly. And if she doesn't have it? Dutch's smile turned cruel. Then Mr. Garrett will have to seek other compensation. You understand? Get off my land! The men turned their horses, but Dutch looked back over his shoulder. We'll be in town a few days. At the saloon. If anyone wants to talk, they know where to find us. They rode off into the gathering darkness, and Caleb stood watching until they disappeared. Only then did he lower the rifle and turn to Clara. She was white as snow, trembling violently, her eyes wide with terror. Clara, he found me, she whispered. I knew he would. I knew. Her legs gave out, and Caleb caught her, lowering her to the porch steps. He sat beside her, keeping the rifle close, his mind racing. Tell me the truth, he said. All of it. Did you steal from Garrett? Claire's laugh was bitter, broken. No, God, no, I didn't take anything. But he's saying I did because... She stopped, pressed her hands to her face. Because I threatened to tell his wife everything. Every lie. Every promise. Every time he... Her voice cracked. I told him I'd expose him if he didn't leave me alone. Let me leave Chicago in peace. So he's claiming you're a thief to discredit you, to make sure no one believes anything you say. Yes. And it's working, isn't it? Those men believe it. The town will believe it. Everyone will believe it. Because I'm nothing. And he's a respected businessman. Caleb's jaw clenched. You're not nothing, and I don't believe it. You should. You should send me away before this gets worse. Before he... Clara looked at Caleb, terror in her eyes. Before he hurts you too. That's what he does. He destroys anyone who gets in his way. I'm not afraid of Garrett or his hired men. You should be. Caleb, you don't understand. He has money, influence. He'll ruin you just for helping me. I don't care. Caleb took her face in his hands, making her look at him. Listen to me. I don't care what Garrett does, or what he says. You're under my protection now, and I'll be damned if I let some coward from Chicago intimidate you. But those men are thugs trying to scare you. Well, it won't work. We'll go to town tomorrow, talk to the sheriff, make sure everyone knows the truth. Clara shook her head frantically. The truth doesn't matter, don't you see? My word against his? No one will believe me, especially not when he's claiming I'm a thief. I believe you. Jonas will believe you, and we'll make others believe you too. How? How can we possibly? Because you're not alone anymore, Clara. You have me. You have friends here. You have a life you're building. And I won't let Garrett take that from you. Clara stared at him, tears streaming down her face. Why? Why would you risk everything for me? Because... Caleb stopped, the words he wanted to say too big, too honest. But she deserved the truth, deserved to know. Because I love you. The words hung in the air between them, stark and undeniable. Clara's breath caught. You can't. We barely... I know it's fast. I know it's probably crazy. But it's true. Somewhere over the past month you've become everything. And I'm not letting Garrett or anyone else take you from me. Caleb, you don't have to say it back. You don't have to feel the same way. But you need to know. You need to know that you matter to me, that I'll fight for you, that I'll protect you with everything I have. Clara threw her arms around him, burying her face in his neck, her whole body shaking with sobs. Caleb held her, one hand in her hair, the other wrapped around her waist, and let her cry. When the tears finally subsided, Clara pulled back just enough to look at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face blotchy, but to Caleb she'd never looked more beautiful. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have for a while now. I was just too afraid to admit it. Caleb's heart stuttered in his chest. Say it again. I love you, and I'm terrified, and I don't know how we're going to fight this, but... She cupped his face in her hands. But I want to try. With you. I want to stay. I want to build a life here. I want... Caleb kissed her. It was soft at first, tentative. 15 years of loneliness and a month of growing connection compressed into that single moment. Then Clara made a small sound in the back of her throat and kissed him back. And gentle became urgent, became desperate, became everything. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. We'll figure this out, he said. Together. Together, Clara agreed. They sat on the porch as darkness fell completely, holding each other, drawing strength from each other. Tomorrow would bring challenges, confronting the sheriff, dealing with Dutch and his men, figuring out how to protect Clara from Garrett's reach. But tonight, they had this moment, this love that had grown in the unlikeliest of places. Caleb? Clara said softly. Yeah? The week isn't up yet. We were supposed to wait until... I know, but I'm tired of waiting, tired of being cautious. Those men showing up, it made me realize we don't have the luxury of time. Life doesn't wait for us to be ready. Clara smiled against his neck. No, it doesn't. So what do you say? Will you stay? Not for a week or a month, but yes. Clara pulled back to look at him. Yes, I'll stay. For as long as you'll have me. Forever then. Forever, Clara repeated, and the words sounded like a promise, like hope, like the future neither of them had believed possible. They went inside as the temperature dropped, and for the first time Clara didn't retreat to the bedroom alone. She stayed with Caleb by the fire, curled against his side, his arm around her shoulders. "We should sleep," Caleb said eventually. "Tomorrow's going to be difficult." "I know, but I don't want this moment to end." "It won't. It's just beginning." Clara looked up at him, love and trust shining in her eyes. "Promise me something. Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens tomorrow, no matter what Garrett does or what those men say, you won't regret this. Won't regret me." Caleb pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I could never regret you. You brought me back to life, Clara. You made me remember what it feels like to hope, to love. I could never regret that. Even if it brings you trouble? Especially then. Because you're worth fighting for. Worth any amount of trouble." Clara's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of joy. "How did I get so lucky? To find you, of all people." "Jonas's meddling." She laughed, the sound watery but genuine. "Remind me to thank him, after I yell at him for scaring me half to death." "I'll hold him down while you do it." They talked quietly into the night, making plans, sharing fears, building dreams. And when exhaustion finally claimed them, they fell asleep there by the fire, wrapped in each other's arms, two broken people who'd found their way to wholeness together. But outside, in the darkness beyond the cabin's warm glow, trouble waited. Dutch and his companions were in town, spreading lies and asking questions. And in Chicago, a man named Garrett was already planning his next move, unwilling to let Clara escape the web of control he'd woven around her. The fight was coming. Caleb knew it. Clara knew it. But they'd face it together. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Caleb woke to find Clara still in his arms. She stirred, her eyes opening slowly, and when she saw him, she smiled. "Good morning," she whispered. "Good morning." Caleb brushed a strand of copper hair from her face. "Ready for today?" Clara took a breath, then nodded. "Ready as I'll ever be. Let's go face the lions." They dressed quickly and prepared for the ride to town. Caleb made sure Clara had the derringer Jonas had once given him, small but effective at close range, and tucked his own pistol into his belt alongside the rifle. "I don't like this," Clara said, looking at the weapons. "I don't like that it's come to this." "Neither do I. But I won't have you unprotected." They rode toward redemption as the sun climbed higher, each lost in their own thoughts. As they crested the last hill and the town came into view, Clara reached over and took Caleb's hand. "Whatever happens," she said, "I'm glad I came here. I'm glad I found you. I'm glad too. And Caleb, if things go badly, if Garrett wins, he won't. But if he does, I want you to know that this month with you has been the best of my life. You gave me hope again. You gave me love. That's more than I ever thought I'd have." Caleb squeezed her hand, his throat tight with emotion. "Things won't go badly. We'll make sure of that." But as they rode into town and saw Dutch and his men lounging outside the saloon, their eyes tracking the wagon with predatory interest, Caleb felt a chill run down his spine. The fight for their future was about to begin, and everything they'd built together hung in the balance. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop outside the sheriff's office, very deliberately not looking at Dutch and his companions across the street. He could feel their eyes on Clara, could sense the threat they represented like a physical weight in the air. "Stay close to me," he murmured as he helped Clara down. She nodded, her face pale but determined. Together they walked into the sheriff's office, the door closing behind them with a solid thunk that felt like a small measure of safety. Sheriff Tom Brennan looked up from his desk, his weathered face creasing with surprise. He was in his 50s, a former lawman from Denver who'd come to redemption seeking a quieter life. Usually he dealt with drunk cowboys and property disputes, nothing more serious. "Caleb Mercer, wasn't expecting to see you. What brings you to town?" His eyes moved to Clara. "Miss Whitfield." "We have a problem, Tom." Caleb gestured to Clara. 3 men rode out to my ranch yesterday. Said they're looking for Clara on behalf of a man in Chicago, making accusations. Brennan's expression grew serious. What kind of accusations? Clara spoke up, her voice steadier than Caleb expected. A man named William Garrett is claiming I stole from him. Jewelry and money. It's a lie, Sheriff. I never took anything. Tell me everything, Brennan said, pulling out a chair for Clara. From the beginning. So Clara told her story again, and this time she held nothing back. She told about Garrett's promises, his lies, the affair that had ruined her reputation. She told about threatening to expose him and fleeing Chicago. She told about the men who'd come to Caleb's ranch, about Dutch's veiled threats. Brennan listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. When Clara finished, he sat back in his chair and sighed. That's a hell of a situation, Miss Whitfield. And I believe you. But believing you and proving Garrett's lying are two different things. What can we do? Caleb asked. Legally? Not much. Garrett would need to file formal charges, get the law involved proper. These men, Dutch and his friends, they're not lawmen. They got no authority here. I can tell them to move along, but if they're not causing trouble, they got a right to be in town, same as anyone. They threatened her, Caleb said. Did they? Specifically? Brennan looked at Clara. Did they make direct threats against you? Clara thought back to the previous evening, to Dutch's careful words. No, not direct threats, just implications, suggestions about what might happen if the property isn't returned. Then my hands are tied unless they do something. Make a move. But I'll keep an eye on them. Brennan stood and walked to the window, looking out at the saloon across the street. They're staying at the hotel. Been asking questions around town about you, Miss Whitfield. About where you came from, how long you're staying, what your relationship is to Caleb. Let them ask, Caleb said. Anyone who knows us knows the truth. And what is the truth? Brennan turned back to them. Because the town's been speculating for weeks now. A woman shows up, stays at your ranch unchaperoned. People talk. And now with these men making accusations, those talks are going to get louder. Clara's cheeks flushed. The truth is, I came here seeking work. Mr. Mercer has employed me. Everything has been proper. Brennan's eyebrow rose. Has it now? Because the way you two look at each other suggests otherwise. Caleb's jaw tightened. Our personal business is our own, Tom. It is until it becomes the town's business. And with 3 strangers calling your character into question, Miss Whitfield, you might want to consider making your situation more official, if you understand my meaning. Clara understood perfectly. Marriage. Again, marriage was being suggested as the solution to protect her reputation, to give her legitimacy in the eyes of the town. We appreciate the advice, Tom, Caleb said, standing. Is there anything else you can do about those men? I'll talk to them. Make it clear they need to conduct themselves peaceful-like. Beyond that, just be careful. Watch your backs. And Miss Whitfield? Brennan's expression softened. For what it's worth, I've known Caleb a long time. He's a good man, and if he's standing by you, that tells me everything I need to know about your character. The words brought tears to Clara's eyes. Thank you, Sheriff. They left the office and stood on the boardwalk, squinting against the bright morning sun. Across the street, Dutch and his men had noticed them. Dutch raised a hand in a mocking salute. Ignore him, Caleb muttered. But as they turned toward the general store, Dutch called out, Miss Whitfield, a word if you please. Keep walking, Caleb said. Clara's steps faltered. Maybe I should talk to him. Find out what he really wants. We know what he wants, to intimidate you. But if I face him, if I show I'm not afraid, you don't have to prove anything to him. Dutch was crossing the street now, his companions following. Miss Whitfield, I just want a moment of your time. Surely that's not too much to ask. Caleb moved to stand between Clara and the approaching men, his hand resting on his pistol. The lady has nothing to say to you. Dutch stopped a few feet away, hands held peacefully at his sides, but there was nothing peaceful about the look in his eyes. Now, that's unfriendly. I'm just trying to resolve this situation without unpleasantness. Then leave town, Clara said, stepping out from behind Caleb. Tell Mr. Garrett I have nothing of his. I never did, and I'm not coming back to Chicago. He figured you'd say that, which is why he sent me with a message. Dutch pulled a folded paper from his coat. A letter. He'd like you to read it. Clara stared at the letter like it was a snake. I don't want anything from him. It's important about your future, your prospects. Dutch's smile was cruel. See, Mr. Garrett's been doing some thinking. He realizes he might have been hasty, accusing you of theft. He's willing to drop all charges, forget the whole thing, if you just come back, talk to him, work things out proper-like. Work things out, Clara repeated, her voice hollow. You mean go back to being his mistress? I mean go back to Chicago where you belong, where you'll be taken care of, protected. Mr. Garrett's a generous man to those who please him. Caleb's hand moved to his gun, but Clara grabbed his arm. Don't. He's not worth it. Listen to the lady, Dutch said. She's smart, knows when she's in over her head. He held out the letter again. Just read it, Miss Whitfield. See what Mr. Garrett's offering. Then you can make an informed decision about your future. My future is here, Clara said firmly, with Caleb, in redemption, and nothing Garrett says will change that. Dutch's expression hardened. You sure about that? Because Mr. Garrett can make life very difficult for you, for both of you. He has friends, influence, money. What do you have, a broken-down ranch and a hermit who'll tire of you soon enough? Caleb's fist connected with Dutch's jaw before he'd consciously decided to throw the punch. Dutch staggered back, blood blooming from his split lip, and his companions reached for their guns. The street erupted into chaos. Sheriff Brennan burst from his office, rifle in hand. Guns down! Now! People scattered, ducking into shops and doorways. Jonas appeared from somewhere, running toward them, and Martha Thomas, always present for drama, stood on the church steps with her hand pressed to her mouth in scandalized delight. Dutch wiped blood from his mouth, his eyes murderous. You'll regret that, Mercer. I regret not hitting you harder, Caleb shot back. Enough! Brennan stepped between them. Dutch, you and your men get back to the hotel, now. And Caleb, you get yourself under control. He insulted Clara. I don't care if he insulted your horse. You can't go around punching people in my town. Brennan turned to Dutch. And you. I warned you about causing trouble. This is your only warning. Next time, you spend the night in my jail. Dutch straightened his coat, still smiling despite the blood. No trouble, Sheriff. Just a misunderstanding. He looked at Clara. You think on Mr. Garrett's offer, Miss Whitfield. We'll be around a few more days if you change your mind. He and his men retreated to the hotel, and Brennan turned to Caleb with exasperation. Damn it, Caleb, I just told you to be careful. He provoked me. He provoked you successfully, which makes you a fool. Brennan sighed. Get Clara somewhere safe, and for God's sake, think before you act. Jonas reached them as Brennan walked away. What the hell happened? Dutch happened, Caleb said tersely. Tried to give Clara a letter from Garrett. Said things he shouldn't have. Jonas looked at Clara, concern in his eyes. You all right? She nodded, though she was trembling. I'm fine, but Caleb shouldn't have... I'd do it again, Caleb interrupted. And that's the problem. Clara turned to him, frustration and fear mixing in her expression. Don't you see? This is exactly what Garrett wants, to provoke you into doing something stupid, to turn the town against us, to prove I'm nothing but trouble. You're not trouble. Then stop acting like I am. Stop fighting my battles for me. I need to handle this myself. How? By reading his damn letter? By considering his offer? No. By showing this town, showing Dutch, that I'm not afraid, that I'm not going anywhere. But I can't do that if you're punching people and proving that I need a man to protect me. Caleb felt like he'd been slapped. I was defending you. I know, and I love you for it, but I need you to trust that I can stand on my own, that I can fight back without you bloodying your knuckles. Clara took his hand, her voice softening. Please, Caleb, let me do this my way. He wanted to argue, wanted to insist that protecting her was his right, his responsibility. But the look in her eyes, fierce and proud and determined, stopped him. All right, he said finally, your way, but I'm not leaving your side. I wouldn't ask you to. Jonas cleared his throat. Well, now that we've established you're both stubborn as mules, maybe we should get off the street before Martha Thomas writes a sermon about this. Too late. Reverend Thomas was approaching, his wife trailing behind him like a bird of prey spotting wounded prey. Caleb, Miss Whitfield, the Reverend said, Perhaps we should talk, privately. They ended up in the church, sitting in the front pew while the Reverend stood before them like they were errant children. Martha hovered nearby, her expression triumphant. "This situation has gotten out of hand," Reverend Thomas began. "These men making accusations, violence in the streets, the whole town gossiping. Something needs to be done." "I agree," Martha interjected. "This woman has brought nothing but scandal since she arrived. First living unmarried with Caleb, now criminals following her from Chicago." "Martha, please," the Reverend said wearily. Then to Clara, "What these men are saying about theft, is it true?" "No," Clara said firmly. "Mr. Garrett is lying to discredit me. I took nothing from him." "But you did have a relationship with him? An improper one?" Clara's face flushed, but she held her head high. "Yes, I was foolish and desperate, and I believed his lies. But I've paid for that mistake with my reputation and my peace. I won't pay with my freedom, too." "Noble words," Martha sneered. "But words don't erase sin." "Neither does your judgment," Jonas said, surprising everyone. He'd followed them into the church and now stood with his arms crossed. "You want to talk about sin, Martha? Let's talk about the sin of a married man who preys on vulnerable women, the sin of a town that blames the victim instead of the predator, the sin of Christians who've forgotten what mercy means." Martha's face went red. "How dare you?" "I dare because I'm tired of watching good people be torn down by gossip and self-righteousness." Jonas looked at Reverend Thomas. "Sir, you're a good man, but your wife is poison, and this town follows her lead because it's easier than thinking for themselves." "Jonas Miller," Martha sputtered, "you will apologize this instant." "I will not. Everything I said is true, and you know it." Reverend Thomas held up his hands. "Please, everyone. This isn't helping." "Jonas, I understand your frustration, but personal attacks won't solve anything." "Then what will?" Caleb asked. "Because Clara and I are tired of defending ourselves, tired of justifying our choices to people who've already made up their minds." The Reverend sighed and sat down on the altar steps. "You want my honest advice? Get married, today, if possible. Make your relationship legitimate in the eyes of God and the law. It won't stop all the gossip, but it will stop most of it, and it will make it much harder for these men to cause you trouble." "Marriage," Clara said quietly. "Everyone keeps saying that, like it's a magic solution. It's not magic, but it is practical. And in your situation, it might be necessary." Caleb looked at Clara, trying to read her expression. They'd confessed their love last night, had talked about a future together, but marriage? Now? Under these circumstances? "Could you give us a moment?" Clara asked the Reverend. "Of course. Take all the time you need." The Reverend ushered Martha out, Jonas following with a last encouraging nod to Caleb. Alone in the church, Caleb and Clara sat in silence for a long moment. "This isn't how I wanted this to go," Caleb finally said. "How did you want it to go?" "I don't know, properly, with time, with courting and proposal," and he gestured helplessly. "Not rushed because of gossip and threats." Clara took his hand. "Nothing about us has been proper, Caleb. From the first moment I arrived, built on a lie, collapsing in your yard. We've done everything backward and wrong, but it's also been real, honest, true. You deserve better than a rushed wedding because the town demands it. I deserve you, and if marriage is what it takes to keep us together, to protect what we've built, then I'm willing. Are you?" Caleb studied her face. This woman who'd crashed into his life and changed everything. She was right. Nothing about them had been conventional, but it had been real, the realest thing he'd experienced in 15 years. "Yes," he said. "If you'll have me, Clara Whitfield. If you'll take a broken-down rancher with more grief than sense." Clara kissed him, cutting off his words. When she pulled back, she was smiling through tears. Yes, I'll marry you. Today, tomorrow, whenever. Just, yes." They sat there holding each other, and Caleb felt something settle in his chest. This was right. Maybe rushed, maybe unconventional, but right. A throat cleared behind them. They turned to find Reverend Thomas in the doorway. "Have you decided?" "We'd like to get married," Caleb said. "If you'll perform the ceremony." The Reverend's face lit up. "Of course, when?" Caleb looked at Clara. Now? She laughed, a bit wild. Now? Right now? Why wait? Give the town something to talk about that isn't scandal. But I'm wearing a traveling dress. There are no flowers, no guests. There's you and me and love. That's all we need. Caleb stood and pulled Clara to her feet. Unless you want to wait, plan something proper. Clara looked around the simple church, at the plain wooden cross above the altar, at the dusty sunlight streaming through the windows. Then she looked at Caleb, and her smile was radiant. No, let's do it now, before anything else can go wrong. Before Garrett, or Dutch, or anyone else can interfere. Let's just be married. Reverend Thomas beamed. Wonderful. I'll need to fetch Martha as a witness, and perhaps we can find someone else. I'll stand up for them, Jonas said, appearing again in the doorway. If you'll have me, Caleb. Caleb felt his throat tighten. Despite everything, the forged letter, the meddling, Jonas was his oldest friend. I'd be honored. Within the hour they were gathered at the altar. Word had spread through town with the speed of wildfire, and people were filing into the church, some out of genuine happiness, others out of sheer curiosity. Mrs. Henderson came, and Sheriff Brennan. Even some of the ranch hands Caleb occasionally worked with showed up, and across the aisle, shooting venomous looks, sat Martha Thomas with a few of her like-minded friends. Clara stood beside Caleb in her worn traveling dress, her hair hastily arranged, without flowers or finery, but to Caleb she'd never looked more beautiful. Dearly beloved, Reverend Thomas began, and Caleb barely heard the words. All he could focus on was Clara's hand in his, the way she looked at him with love and trust and hope. When it came time for the vows, Clara's voice was clear and strong. I, Clara Whitfield, take you, Caleb Mercer, to be my husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. I, Caleb Mercer, take you, Clara Whitfield, to be my wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Caleb cupped Clara's face in his hands and kissed her, and the church erupted in applause. When they broke apart, both were crying, both were laughing, both were overwhelmed with the magnitude of what they'd just done. They were married. Actually married. The congregation filed out to offer congratulations, and for a moment Caleb let himself believe everything would be all right, that this marriage would protect Clara, that their love was strong enough to overcome whatever Garrett threw at them. Then he saw Dutch standing at the back of the church, watching with cold calculation. The threat wasn't over. But at least now they'd face it as husband and wife. The celebration that followed was impromptu but joyful. Jonas insisted on buying drinks at the saloon, and half the town joined in toasting the newlyweds. Even some of those who'd been skeptical seemed to soften, won over by the obvious love between Caleb and Clara. But Dutch and his men stayed at their corner table, watching everything with predatory patience. As the afternoon wore on, Caleb pulled Jonas aside. Those men aren't leaving. They're waiting for something. I know. I've been keeping an eye on them. Jonas lowered his voice. They've been asking around about Garrett's stolen property, suggesting that maybe Clara hid it at your ranch, planting seeds. She didn't take anything. You and I know that. But they're setting something up, building a narrative. Jonas gripped Caleb's shoulder. Watch yourself. Watch Clara. I have a bad feeling about this. Caleb had the same feeling, and it only grew stronger when Dutch approached as they were preparing to leave. Congratulations on the wedding, Dutch said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Very romantic, very sudden. Is there a point to this? Caleb asked. Just wondering if Mrs. Mercer told you about the $10,000. The saloon went quiet. Everyone nearby turned to listen. What $10,000? Caleb asked carefully. The money Mr. Garrett says was stolen, along with some very valuable jewelry, family heirlooms, worth a fortune. Dutch looked around at the listening crowd. You sure you want to tie yourself to a thief, Mercer? Because once that stolen property is found, your wife will be going to prison, and you might be going with her as an accomplice. Clara's face went white. That's a lie. There was no money, no jewelry. He's making it all up. Is he? Then you won't mind if we search your ranch, just to clear your name, unless you have something to hide. You have no authority to search anything, Sheriff Brennan said, stepping forward. And neither does Garrett. If he wants to make formal accusations, he can come here himself and go through proper legal channels. Oh, he'll come. He's already on his way, in fact. Should be here in a few days with all the proper paperwork, including a warrant for Clara Mercer's arrest. Dutch tipped his hat mockingly. Enjoy your honeymoon while it lasts. He walked out, leaving a stunned silence behind him. Clara swayed and Caleb caught her. It's not true. None of it is true. Caleb, you have to believe me. I believe you, Caleb said firmly, loud enough for everyone to hear. This is Garrett trying to punish you for exposing him, trying to destroy you because you wouldn't be controlled. But he could see the doubt in some faces, could hear the whispers starting. They left the saloon and headed for the wagon, Caleb's mind racing. If Garrett was coming with legal papers, with warrants, this situation was about to get much worse. They needed a plan, needed evidence to prove Clara's innocence. But how did you prove you didn't take something that might not even exist? We should leave, Clara said as they drove toward the ranch. Run. Start over somewhere else. Running would make you look guilty. Staying might put me in prison. Caleb, if Garrett has forged documents, if he's paid off officials, I won't stand a chance. The word of a mistress against a respected businessman, I'll hang. You won't hang. I won't let that happen. You can't stop it, don't you see? This was always how it was going to end. Me paying for the crime of not being who he wanted me to be. Clara's voice broke. I should never have stayed. Should never have let you marry me. Now I've dragged you into this mess. Clara, listen to me. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her. You didn't drag me into anything. I chose this, chose you, and I'm not giving up. There has to be a way to prove your innocence. How? I don't know yet. No, but we'll figure it out. Caleb took her hands. You're not alone anymore. You're my wife, and I protect what's mine. Clara laughed bitterly. Your wife for all of 6 hours, and already I'm destroying your life. You saved my life. Everything else is details. They rode the rest of the way in silence, each lost in thought. When they reached the ranch, Caleb helped Clara down and they stood in the yard looking at the cabin that had become their home. Whatever happens, Clara said, I want you to know today was the happiest day of my life. Becoming your wife, standing with you in that church, even with everything else, even knowing what's coming, I wouldn't change it. Caleb pulled her into his arms. Neither would I. They went inside, and Caleb built a fire while Clara moved around the cabin with distracted nervousness. This should have been their wedding night, should have been filled with joy and celebration and new beginnings. Instead, it was shadowed by fear. Caleb? Clara said from the bedroom doorway. I'm frightened. I know, so am I. What are we going to do? He went to her, taking her hands. We're going to fight. We're going to prove Garrett's lying. And we're going to build the life we want, free from his shadow. How can you be so sure? Because I have to be. Because giving up isn't an option. Because you're worth fighting for, Clara Mercer. He smiled at her new name. My wife. Clara smiled back through her tears. Say it again. My wife. Clara Mercer. My partner. My love. My future. She kissed him then, desperate and hungry, trying to lose her fear in his touch. Caleb kissed her back, pouring all his love and promise and determination into that connection. They made love for the first time that night, gentle and reverent, two broken people trying to create something whole. And for a few hours, the world beyond their cabin walls ceased to exist. But morning came too soon, bringing with it the reality they'd tried to forget. Caleb woke to find Clara already up, standing at the window and looking out at the mountains. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Couldn't sleep? He asked. Couldn't stop thinking about Garrett, about what's coming. She leaned back against him. Caleb, there's something I need to tell you about Chicago, about why Garrett is really doing this. Tell me. Clara took a shaky breath. I wasn't just his mistress. There was someone else, before him. A man I actually loved. His name was Thomas, and he worked at the boarding house too. We were going to be married. What happened? Garrett happened. He wanted me, and when I refused him, Claire's voice caught. He had Thomas fired, blacklisted him so he couldn't find work anywhere in Chicago. Thomas left the city, and I never heard from him again. I was alone and desperate, and Garrett swooped in, made it clear that if I wanted to survive, I'd need his protection. Caleb's hands clenched. He coerced you. He gave me a choice, him or starvation, some choice. Clara turned to face Caleb. But here's the thing. Before Thomas left, he told me something. He discovered that Garrett was embezzling from the boarding house owner, had been for years. Garrett found out that Thomas knew, which is why he really got rid of him. Did you tell anyone? I tried to, but no one would listen to me. I was just a maid, and Garrett was respectable. But I kept Thomas's evidence, papers he'd copied showing the embezzlement. I hid them before I left Chicago. Caleb's mind raced. That's why Garrett wants you back. Not because you stole from him, but because you have evidence against him. Yes, and if he can discredit me, make me out to be a thief and a liar, then even if that evidence comes to light, no one will believe it. Where did you hide it? Clara smiled sadly. In the one place I thought was safe, with a woman who runs a church charity in Chicago. A woman who knew Thomas and believed me when I told her what Garrett had done. Her name is Sister Mary Catherine. We need to contact her, get that evidence. It could take weeks. Garrett will be here in days. Then we buy time, we fight him legally, delay everything we can while we get proof of his real crimes. Caleb cupped Clara's face. This changes everything. He's not just a vindictive ex-lover. He's a criminal trying to silence a witness. But we still have to prove it. And Garrett has money and influence. And we have the truth. That has to count for something. Over the next 2 days, Caleb and Clara prepared for battle. Caleb sent a telegram to Sister Mary Catherine, carefully worded to avoid suspicion, asking her to send Thomas's documents. Clara wrote down everything she remembered about Garrett's crimes, creating a timeline and record of his embezzlement. Jonas helped where he could, gathering character witnesses willing to speak for Clara. Mrs. Henderson offered her support, as did Sheriff Brennan, though he warned them that if Garrett came with legitimate legal authority, his hands would be tied. And through it all, Dutch and his men watched and waited. On the third day, Garrett arrived. He came in a fancy coach with brass fittings, dressed in an expensive suit, looking every inch the successful businessman. He checked into the hotel and immediately went to the sheriff's office with a leather folder full of documents. Caleb and Clara were summoned an hour later. Garrett sat in Sheriff Brennan's office like he owned it, his smile smug and proprietary. He was handsome in a polished way, with dark hair slicked back and cold eyes that raked over Clara with a possessiveness that made Caleb's skin crawl. "Clara," Garrett said warmly, like greeting an old friend, "you're looking well. Ranch life suits you." "Mr. Garrett," Clara said coldly, "and you must be the husband. Caleb Mercer." Garrett extended a hand that Caleb ignored. "How charming! A whirlwind romance." "Get to the point," Brennan said. "You said you have legal cause to be here." Garrett opened his folder. "Indeed. I have here a sworn affidavit stating that Clara Mercer now, stole $10,000 in cash and $15,000 worth of jewelry from my establishment in Chicago. I also have witness statements corroborating the theft." "Witness statements from whom?" Caleb demanded. "People you paid to lie?" "From my staff. Reputable individuals who saw Clara acting suspiciously in the days before she disappeared." Garrett's smile never wavered. "I've also secured a warrant for her arrest, pending investigation." Brennan examined the papers, his expression growing grim. "These look legitimate." "They are legitimate, signed by a judge in Chicago and legally binding here." Garrett looked at Clara. "Of course, this could all go away if Clara simply returns what she took. I'm willing to be magnanimous. Forget the theft. Drop all charges. If she comes back to Chicago with me." "Never," Clara said. "Then you leave me no choice." Garrett nodded to Brennan. "Sheriff, I believe you have an arrest to make." Brennan stood slowly, reluctantly. "Clara Mercer, I'm afraid I have to place you under arrest for theft. You have the right to—" "Wait," Caleb interrupted. "These documents, they're based on false testimony. Garrett is lying to get Clara back under his control. That's a serious accusation, Garrett said mildly. Do you have proof? We will. We're gathering evidence of your real crimes. Embezzlement, fraud, coercion. Garrett laughed. Please. You think anyone will believe the word of a thief and a mountain hermit over mine? I have reputation, standing, resources. What do you have? The truth, Clara said. The truth is whatever I say it is. Whatever the courts decide it is. And the courts will decide in my favor because I have the law on my side. Garrett stood and adjusted his cuffs. Sheriff, if you please. Brennan moved toward Clara, his face anguished. I'm sorry, I have no choice. Yes, you do, Jonas said, bursting into the office. You have a choice to wait until we've had time to mount a proper defense, to investigate these claims, to ensure justice is actually being served. The warrant is legal, Brennan said. My hands are tied. Then untie them. Tom, you know Clara. You know Caleb. They're good people. And I'm sorry. But the law is the law. Caleb moved to stand in front of Clara. You'll have to go through me. Caleb, don't, Clara said. It will only make things worse. I don't care. I won't let them take you. Garrett sighed dramatically. How touching. But assault on a law officer will land you in jail right alongside your wife. Is that what you want? Caleb's hands clenched, every muscle in his body screaming to fight, to protect Clara no matter the cost. But she touched his arm, her eyes pleading. Let them do this, she whispered. Let them arrest me. We'll fight it legally, the right way. Clara, please, trust me. Trust that we'll win in the end. It went against every instinct, but Caleb stepped aside. Brennan approached Clara with handcuffs, and the sight of iron around her wrists nearly broke Caleb's control. She'll be in the town jail until the circuit judge arrives, Brennan said. Should be about a week. A week in jail for crimes she didn't commit, Caleb said bitterly. A week for the truth to come out, Clara corrected, trying to sound brave even as tears streamed down her face. Caleb, send that telegram. Get those documents. Prove what he really is. Garrett's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something that might have been concern. What documents? The ones that show your embezzlement, your fraud, the ones Thomas copied before you destroyed him. Now Garrett's mask cracked completely. Rage flooded his features, quickly suppressed but not quickly enough. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do, and soon everyone else will too. Garrett recovered his composure, but Caleb had seen the fear. They'd struck a nerve. The documents were real, and Garrett knew it. Sheriff, I'd like my property secured, Garrett said. The stolen items may be hidden at the Mercer Ranch. I request permission to search. Over my dead body, Caleb growled. That can be arranged, Dutch said from the doorway. The threat hung in the air, thick and ugly. Brennan stepped between them. No one is searching anything without proper legal authority, and no one is threatening anyone in my town. Garrett, you've made your arrest. Now you wait for the judge like everyone else. Dutch, you and your men stay out of trouble, or you'll be joining Mrs. Mercer in a cell. Garrett smiled coldly. Of course, Sheriff. I'm a law-abiding citizen. I'll wait for justice to be served. He looked at Clara, and his voice dropped to a whisper only she and Caleb could hear. But justice can be harsh, my dear, especially for women who forget their place. You could have had everything. Now you'll have nothing, and your mountain man will watch you hang for crimes you didn't commit, all because you couldn't accept the life I offered you. The life you offered was a cage, Clara said. I'd rather die free than live in chains. How noble. We'll see if you still feel that way when you're standing on the gallows. Brennan led Clara away, and Caleb watched helplessly as the woman he loved was locked in a cell. The iron door clanging shut was the worst sound he'd ever heard. I'll stay with her, Jonas offered. Make sure she's safe. You go send that telegram. Get those documents here as fast as humanly possible. Caleb nodded, unable to speak past the rage and fear choking him. He left the jail and went straight to the telegraph office, composing a message to Sister Mary Catherine that begged her to send Thomas's evidence immediately, explaining that Clara's life depended on it. The response came within hours. Documents on their way. Will arrive in 3 days. Praying for you both. 3 days. The judge would arrive in a week. They had 4 days to gather evidence, build a defense, and prove Garrett was the real criminal. It would have to be enough. Caleb spent those 3 days in constant motion. He gathered affidavits from people in Redemption attesting to Clara's character. He researched Garrett's business dealings, finding whispers of impropriety but nothing concrete. He visited Clara daily, sitting outside her cell and holding her hand through the bars, trying to give her hope when his own was faltering. And he prayed. For the first time in 15 years, Caleb Mercer prayed. The documents arrived on the morning of the 4th day, carried by a nun who'd traveled from Chicago to testify. Sister Mary Catherine was elderly but fierce, with eyes that had seen too much suffering and a determination to end it. "Thomas gave me these before he died," she told Caleb and Jonas. Said if anything happened to him, I should make sure Clara was protected, that Garrett faced justice. "Thomas is dead?" Caleb asked. "Killed in what they called a robbery, but I always suspected Garrett had a hand in it." She opened a leather portfolio, revealing ledgers, bank statements, and correspondence. "Everything's here. Proof of Garrett's embezzlement going back 5 years. Hundreds of thousands of dollars stolen and hidden." Caleb's heart raced. This is it. This will clear Clara. It will also put Garrett in prison for the rest of his life. He'll fight like a cornered animal. Let him fight. We have the truth now. They took the evidence to Sheriff Brennan, who examined it with growing amazement and horror. If this is authentic, and it looks authentic, Garrett's finished. This is ironclad proof of massive fraud. So you'll release Clara? I'll present this to the judge when he arrives tomorrow. He'll make the final decision. Tomorrow? Garrett could run before then. Which is why I'm going to have a talk with him right now. Make it clear he's not leaving town. Brennan stood, gathering the documents. And I'm moving Clara to better quarters. She's not a criminal. She's a witness. She should be treated accordingly. That night, Caleb was finally allowed to see Clara in private, in a small room at the hotel where Brennan had relocated her. She fell into his arms, and they held each other like drowning people clinging to driftwood. "It's almost over," Caleb murmured against her hair. "The documents arrived. Proof of everything. Garrett's done." "Are you sure?" "He's slippery. He always finds a way. Not this time. This time the evidence is too strong. The nun who brought it will testify. We have him." Clara pulled back to look at him, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. "We're really going to win?" "Yes. You're going to be free, and Garrett's going to pay for everything he's done." She laughed, the sound broken and joyful. "I can't believe it. After everything, we're actually going to—" The window shattered. Glass exploded inward, and something heavy thudded against the far wall. Caleb threw himself over Clara, shielding her with his body as smoke began to fill the room. "Fire!" someone shouted from outside. Caleb looked up to see flames spreading from what appeared to be a bottle of kerosene that had been thrown through the window. The room was filling with smoke fast, the fire spreading to the curtains, the furniture. "We have to get out," he coughed, pulling Clara toward the door. But the door was locked from the outside. They were trapped. Caleb threw his shoulder against the door, once, twice, but it wouldn't budge. The smoke was getting thicker, the heat more intense. Clara was coughing, struggling to breathe. "The window!" she gasped. But the window was blocked by flames. They were surrounded, the fire closing in, and Caleb realized with horrible clarity that this was Garrett's final move. If he couldn't have Clara, if he couldn't control her, he'd destroy her, destroy them both. Caleb wrapped his arms around Clara, his mind racing for a solution, any solution. But the smoke was too thick, the fire too hot, and consciousness was slipping away. This couldn't be how it ended. Not after everything they'd fought for, not after finally finding each other. But the darkness was pulling him down, and Clara's body was going limp in his arms. And Caleb's last thought before he passed out was that he'd failed her. Failed to protect her. Failed to save her. Failed to give them the future they deserved. The world went black. And then, through the darkness, Caleb heard shouting. Felt hands grabbing him, dragging him. Cool air hit his face, and he gasped, coughing up smoke, his lungs burning. "Clara," he tried to say, but it came out as a croak. "She's here. She's alive." Caleb forced his eyes open to see Jonas's face above him, covered in soot. They were outside the hotel, and the building was engulfed in flames. People were running with buckets, trying to save what they could. And beside him, coughing but breathing, was Clara. "You're alive," he rasped, reaching for her. "So are you." She gripped his hand. "Jonas broke down the door, saved us." Caleb looked at his friend who was examining a burn on his arm. "You could have died. So could you. We're even." Jonas's expression was grim. "It was Garrett, or Dutch. Someone set that fire deliberately, tried to kill you both." "Where is he?" Caleb struggled to sit up. "Where's Garrett?" "Gone. Disappeared right before the fire started. Dutch and his men too." Sheriff Brennan appeared, his face black with soot. "They knew we had the evidence, knew they were finished. This was their way out. They tried to murder us." "I know, and they'll pay for it. I've sent riders to track them down. They won't get far." But Caleb could see the doubt in Brennan's eyes. Garrett had money and resources. He could disappear, create a new identity, escape justice entirely, unless they stopped him first. "I'm going after him," Caleb said, trying to stand. Clara grabbed his arm. "No, let the law handle it. The law let him get away. Let him try to kill us. And chasing him will just get you killed. Caleb, please. We're alive. We have the evidence. He's ruined even if he runs. Isn't that enough?" Caleb looked at her, at the soot on her face, and the terror in her eyes, and the love that shone through it all, and he realized she was right. Garrett wasn't worth dying for, wasn't worth leaving Clara for. "All right," he said. "All right, I'll stay. But if he comes back, we'll deal with it. Together." They held each other while the hotel burned, while the town rallied to fight the fire, while somewhere in the darkness Garrett fled from the consequences of his crimes. 2 days later, the circuit judge arrived to find Garrett gone and the case against Clara dismissed. The evidence of embezzlement was forwarded to authorities in Chicago, and warrants were issued for Garrett's arrest. Clara was free. They rode back to the ranch together, exhausted, smoke-damaged, but alive. And as they crested the hill and saw their home spread out below them, Caleb felt something settle in his chest. They'd won. Against all odds, against Garrett's money and influence and violence, they'd won. "What now?" Clara asked. "Now we live. We build the life we want. We let the past go and focus on the future." Clara smiled, and it was like sunrise after the longest night. "Our future." "Yes, our future." They rode down to the ranch hand in hand, ready to begin again. The cabin would need work after their absence. The animals would need tending. The fence still needed mending, and the roof on the barn still leaked. But none of that mattered, because they had each other. They had love. They had hope. And that was enough. That was everything. In the months that followed, Caleb and Clara built a life that neither had dared to dream possible. Clara's sewing business flourished, bringing in steady income and respect from the community. Caleb's ranch prospered with her help, the land responding to the care they poured into it. They never heard from Garrett again. Rumor had it he'd fled to Mexico, living under an assumed name, always looking over his shoulder. Justice had caught up with him in its own way, not prison, but a life of fear and hiding. Clara was content with that. She had everything she wanted right here. One morning, nearly a year after their wedding, Clara woke feeling ill. Caleb fussed over her, worried, until she laughed and told him the truth. She was pregnant. They were going to have a child. Caleb held her, tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed with joy he'd thought he'd never feel again. A child. A family. A future full of love and laughter and second chances. "I love you," he whispered against Clara's hair. "I love you so much." "I love you too. Thank you for taking a chance on me. On us. Best chance I ever took." They stood there in the cabin that had once been a tomb and was now a home, holding each other, feeling their child's future growing between them. Jonas had been right all along. Sometimes meddling paid off. Sometimes lies led to truth. Sometimes the most broken people could find their way to wholeness in each other's arms. And sometimes, just sometimes, love was enough to overcome anything, even the past, even fear, even the darkness that had once seemed insurmountable. Caleb Mercer had spent 15 years dying alone on a mountain. But Clara had brought him back to life, and together they would live fully, love completely, and build a future that honored both their pain and their hope. The ranch that once echoed with silence now rang with laughter and love. And the lonely rancher who hadn't touched a woman in 15 years held his wife close, marveling at the miracle of second chances. Their story had begun with a lie, but it had become the truest thing either of them had ever known.